A light touch on the shoulder woke Princess Hilary. With a heavy groan, she opened her eyes. The assistant announced that their journey had come to an end, and it was time for Her Highness to prepare for her arrival. The princess had not expected the journey to end so quickly, and preferred to postpone the preparations. The persistent maid reminded her that it was her first day at the palace and she couldn't be late, hinting that for others, being late was a common occurrence. Hilary remarked, "Who would have thought that her arrival at the palace would be so sudden and without any ceremony?" The assistant did not object, only held out her luxurious hat. She strongly advised Her Highness to go and express all her thoughts outside the palace walls. By that day, the majestic castle had already witnessed the fate of 4 concubines. One of them left its walls forever, finding eternal peace, and following them, a 5th Hilaria appeared, whose heart burned with the flame of determination to change the course of her own history. The carriage came to a smooth stop at the front gate of the estate. The maid's outstretched hand provided support as the princess stepped onto the cobblestones. Before her gaze spread out a majestic panorama of the castle. The very history of luxury and power seemed frozen in its stone. Confusion clouded the assistant's face. She didn't understand why no one had met them. There was no formal meet and greet. The princess, wrapped in a robe of indifferent dignity, considered it a matter of course. There were so many of them that it did not matter who would overshadow the emperor's chambers. A daring spark ignited in her thoughts. To send everything to hell and return to her native Guinevere, where the air smelled of freedom. The assistant timidly curled her lips into a smile, taking the princess's words as bitter humor. Suddenly, their attention was drawn to a figure approaching majestically, a gallantly dressed man whose manners radiated elegance. He welcomed them to the Infred Empire. The man bowed his head respectfully to Lady Hilaria Guinevere. The stranger introduced himself as Svein, the senior servant of the imperial castle of Vladislav, and he bowed his head in a deep bow for the second time. The senior servant addressed the princess respectfully. Lady Hilaria, covering her face with her fan, glanced quickly at the servant, who was called the imperial dog behind her back. With a barely noticeable smile, she replied that it was a great honor for her to meet him. And she noticed that the wonderful weather supposedly even made the horses run faster, rejoicing at her timely arrival, although it was not clear whether it could be considered timely. After all, no one knew exactly when it was supposed to be met. The assistant, knowing the princess's straightforwardness, nodded subtly and was indignant, confirming her opinion about the meeting being late. Swain agreed with the beauty of the day and expressed his pleasure at meeting the esteemed lady on time, after which he offered to escort her to the palace without wasting time. Covering herself with her fan, the princess thanked him for the offer. The assistant felt a subtle tension that arose between them, a silent competition of invisible forces. Walking along the alleys, Hilaria involuntarily noted the truth of the rumors about the extraordinary beauty of the imperial gardens, which were truly striking in their luxury. Surprised, Katie walked next to the princess, who suddenly asked with a smile, did she think they were heading for a secret picnic in the garden? The assistant blinked in confusion at the unexpected joke. She asked with concern if Her Highness was okay. Her own heart was pounding with anxiety. She felt a strange, sticky fear that something terrible was about to happen. Although her mind desperately tried to calm her down, Hilaria stubbornly insisted that there was no reason to be afraid. A few days ago, a mysterious sphere, a source of unknown power, appeared in Guinevere's principality. Peeking into its depths, she became a witness to the future. Turning to Katie, the princess, in a trembling voice, described the terrible picture that had appeared before her inner vision. The future Hilaria had denied the emperor was a nightmare. Her father and mother, the cozy streets of her childhood, all drowned in a sea of dead bodies, and all around lay only gray ash. Was this really the end, and that terrible fate had befallen them only because of her refusal? Those thoughts throbbed painfully in her mind. Tears clouded her vision as she watched her beloved principality disappear, turning into a veritable hell. Her body shuddered with terror that permeated every cell. Hilaria had no right to allow this to happen. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the loud voice of Swain, announcing their arrival. The majestic palace of the Steel Rose appeared before them. The servant explained that from now on he and his assistant would live there, in one of the most beautiful places in His Majesty's estates. Swain presented the possessions as a gift from the emperor to the princess. Katie exchanged a surprised look with the princess. Hilaria wondered, could the place be considered a gift, remembering the future horrors he had committed? Anger gripped the princess's heart. However, the servant politely invited them to come inside. They crossed the threshold of the luxurious castle. The reason that prompted her to agree to marry the emperor. The salvation of her native principality of Guinevere appeared before her with all its poignancy. As long as she is by his side, he will be unable to do any harm, and she may be able to change the terrible future. At the entrance to the palace, they were met by a friendly girl. She bowed and introduced herself as Celestor, the senior maid of the Steel Rose Palace. With respect in her voice, she expressed her honor to serve the princess, who was looking at her intently. Then the maid offered to show the lady to her bedroom. Celeste, whose friendliness seemed genuine, gestured for them to follow her. The princess walked silently through the palace corridors. Carefully examining the exquisite moldings and sumptuous tapestries, she expressed her admiration and honor to meet Celeste, and she noted that she was glad to meet her first in such a wonderful place. Admiring the beauty of the palace, Hilaria forgot about etiquette, and the maid looked at her. Recovering, the princess introduced her childhood friend Katie with a smile. With a soft smile, Celeste reciprocated. The maid silently regarded Kate, her gaze calm and attentive. She bowed her head in a slight bow. Her voice was filled with genuine joy at the acquaintance. As the princess entered the bedroom, she smelled a thick, almost intoxicating aroma that filled the air of the entire room. The bright, garish patterns of the curtains instantly tired her eyes. She involuntarily thought that this was definitely a preparation, until her obligatory wedding night with the emperor. And that thought did not ignite a single spark of enthusiasm in her soul. She hadn't even had time to look around the room when Celeste called her, inviting her to follow her to the dressing room. The maid noted the unusual paleness of the princess's skin. Knowing that this feature distinguished all northern women, she was sure that any color would suit such a delicate beauty. And so, without hesitation, she suggested a bold red. Hilaria agreed, but noted that she had brought a lot of outfits with her, and at first she wanted to choose one of her own. A faint shadow of discontent crossed Celeste's face. She announced that she would not tolerate objections, that there were unbreakable rules, which reigned in the castle of Vladislav, and therefore the princess did not have the right to freely choose her outfit. She took out an elegant dress from the closet. The maid pointed to the delicate embroidery on the chest. She explained that the flower embroidered on the lining was not just an ornament, but a symbol of that house. Purple indicated belonging to His Majesty the Emperor, red to the Emperor's bride, pale pink to the ruler's concubines, and sunny yellow for the grandchildren of the imperial family. Clothes without that flower would violate the inviolable laws of the court, the maid emphasized. The princess instantly understood everything. Those intrusive instructions seemed unnecessary and annoying to her. A disturbing thought flashed through her mind. Perhaps it was a carefully thought-out precaution against insidious poisoning attempts. Bribed tailors could easily create such an outfit. Therefore, for any plan, it was necessary to know all the laws of the castle. Therefore, the maid announced in the tone of a teacher that the princess would have to go through a long path of learning to please His Majesty. Although Hilaria carefully caught every word the maid said, her thoughts were far away, weaving a lace of her own plans. With a gentle smile on her lips, Her Highness asked, "Did she think the girl's name was Celestor?" The maid nodded in the affirmative, her eyes still fixed on the dresses. Hilary said in a reproachful tone that the other person had completely forgotten who she was talking to. Celeste raised her eyebrows in surprise, not understanding the hidden meaning. The princess continued briskly, assuring her that she was a simple person by nature. And most of Guinevere's inhabitants are the same. It never even crossed her mind to bear the emperor an heir and stay in the castle longer than necessary. The maid felt a sense of unease wash over her. The air in the room seemed to thicken. She blinked in confusion, not understanding why she had lost interest in the flowers in question. Frightened by her own carelessness, Celeste fidgeted, trying to find an excuse for her mistake. Suddenly, Hilaria squeezed her hand imperiously and continued. As soon as she had achieved her goal, she would leave that palace immediately. Her nature did not tolerate submission, and the thought of spending her whole life in that place was repugnant to her. She could not bear to be aware of anyone's superiority. In an imperious tone, the princess asked if the maid had finally understood her intentions and let go of her hand. And she emphasized that she expected unquestioning obedience. There was nothing complicated about her words. Even a child could understand them. Celestor felt a cold terror run through her, as if a predator were preparing to pounce. Forced to answer, she said softly, bowing her head, that she understood. Hilaria smiled contentedly, pleased with her submission. And she ordered to immediately go to the emperor and deliver the news that she was not feeling well and would not be able to spend the night with him. But the maid timidly tried to object, reminding her that only after spending the night with the emperor would she become his concubine. In response, Her Highness laughed out loud right in her face, calling Celester too pedantic. With a smile, Hilaria emphasized that she had not arrived there under the terms of a contract, but as the princess of her own principality. These words made Celester think. Indeed, the Steel Rose's palace and the special treatment given to Her Highness were strikingly different from what was usually prepared for other concubines. Even the personal meeting from the senior servant Swain was unprecedented. The maid's heart was filled with hope to serve the future empress. The princess moved closer and gently touched her cheek. She explained that regardless of the first night, her status as a concubine would not change. This was due to the treaty between the Principality of Guinevere and the Infrid Empire. Even if she turned out to be a cunning schemer, capable of a coup, Celeste was stunned, listening intently to those words. The princess strongly advised her to think carefully about her choice, or she continues to act like this and she will be expelled from the imperial castle. The girl lowered her head, and the other maids present trembled with fear. Or, as the princess promised, she would support her. And soon the maid would become her closest assistant, the right hand of the mistress of that castle. In tense silence, Hilaria waited for the maid to speak. Finally, she quietly said that she would convey the news of her weakness to the emperor. In response, the princess gave her a soft smile, calling her choice a wise one and expressing hope for their future friendship. Celeste bowed her head submissively, but at that moment a faint golden glint flashed in the depths of the princess's eyes. The girl, having noticed him, could not say for sure whether it was a random play of light or something much more. The princess's stern tone towards the senior maid made Kate uncomfortable. The girl was worried about His Majesty's reaction when he found out about everything. The princess, wearily sinking onto the bed, reassured Katie, and asking her not to worry about trifles, she felt confident. She assured him that even if the emperor found out, he would not do anything to her. After all, her person was too significant for such concerns immediately after her arrival. The very meeting with a representative of the emperor's inner circle was already revealing. Ordinary concubines were not greeted in this way. His purpose was probably to find out her potential usefulness. All this was just a formality. In reality, the concubine was to resist the influence of the emperor's mother. Instead, she is just a pawn in a complex political game between the emperor and the dowager empress, who cherished the hope of placing her exiled son on the throne. Each of them played their own game, involving the entire court, including the noble daughters and the hostage who appeared under the guise of the emperor's wife. So the ruler was aware of the whirlpool of intrigues the princess would fall into, whose principality had always adhered to neutrality. Kate persistently warned the princess about the other concubines living in the castle, begging her to be careful to avoid any trouble. Hilaria remarked on the excessive anxiety surrounding her person. The alarmed assistant confirmed. After all, Her Highness is the only princess of their principality. The princess firmly declared that her arrival was to save their lands from imminent ruin, and she would begin to establish her own order. Ebn Infred, the Emperor of Infred, was distinguished by his meticulousness and cruelty. He would stop at nothing for his own gain. He did not hesitate to use Guinevere's principality as bait in a war. To secure the future of her people, the princess agreed to marry him. Hoping to protect the principality from further threats, she was determined to achieve victory at all costs, using Guinevere's strength. She asked Kate to look down the hallway. The assistant immediately complied, assuring her that no one was there. Then the princess ordered the window to be checked. Kate obediently went over and closed the curtains as her mistress had ordered. The room was plunged into semi-darkness. Suddenly, yellow lights shone surrounding the princess. They spread throughout the room. Her own eyes flashed with yellow light, and a swarm of butterflies appeared around her, circling enchantedly in the air. The princess turned to the butterflies, promising to wait for their return, and they scattered throughout the imperial estate. When Kate drew back the curtains, the room was once again filled with light, and Her Highness, exhausted, asked for the magic crystal. The assistant handed it to her. She thought anxiously and asked if Hilaria had summoned too many spirits, but nothing could be changed. After all, the castle was too big. The princess took the stone and, looking at it, noticed that the traces of the maids and maids had formed a dense network, more complex than she had expected. The butterflies were able to gather more information. One crystal didn't seem enough, so she asked how many more magic stones they had brought with them. Looking into the bag, the assistant realized with horror that, in her opinion, there would barely be enough crystals for a month. She suggested contacting Lady Beatrice, but the princess said that she had already sent the butterfly to Bibi, and that they would soon make themselves known. Kate anxiously asked how the lady was feeling, whether she was feeling feverish. The princess reassured her, assuring her that she was feeling fine and could handle it. Then she decided to use the butterfly to find out what Celeste was doing. She overheard the maid's conversation with Swain, in which the girl reported that the princess had been traveling in a carriage for a long time, and although she looked decent, she could not get out of bed, insisting on an urgent message to His Majesty and the summoning of a doctor. Swain obeyed without hesitation and went to carry out the errand. A soft laugh escaped Hilaria's lips. When the assistant asked what had happened, she only winked defiantly, assuring her that it seemed like Celeste had acted wisely. Kate sighed with relief and poured all the magic crystals into the exquisite box. She was worried that the lady would use the girl as food for butterflies. The princess reassured her, and she had no intention of doing that anytime soon. But Kate still felt uneasy at the hint of such a possibility in the future. She continued to disassemble and lay out her things. Falling exhausted onto the bed, Hilaria began to think about the future. She also thought about her next day at the castle. Meanwhile, in the eastern wing of Vladislav Castle in the Imperial office, Eben spoke with Swain, trying to understand his thoughts on Milady. The assistant was puzzled by the fact that the princess, having arrived at the palace, had a blooming appearance. And then he complains of weakness and suggested her cunning. He expressed his fears that news of the inability of one of the concubines to spend her first night with the emperor might reach Guinevere herself. In response, the lord only laughed. Swain did not dare to ask about the reason for his mirth and his plans for the birth of an heir. Suddenly, Eben looked at him intently, but Swain assured him that he had said nothing. His thoughts must have escaped him. The emperor ordered Hilaria to be given healing herbs and informed of her status as an imperial concubine. The servant obeyed without a word. The next morning, Eben expressed a desire to have breakfast with her alone, which greatly surprised the assistant. He asked if they would really be having breakfast, just the two of them. The emperor just glanced at him and nodded in the affirmative. Eben remembered the approaching birthday of the Dowager Empress, but he had not yet seen the face of his new wife, who, as was customary, was to sit next to him at the banquet. Looking up from the documents, he asked the servant if there were any problems. He turned pale and assured her that he would pass on everything. The emperor mentally noted how quickly Hilaria had been able to influence Celeste on the very first day of her arrival. His thoughts involuntarily returned to the rumors of the special charms inherent in the women of Guinevere, and a faint smile flickered on his lips. The news of the breakfast together infuriated the princess. Despite her complaints of being unwell, Celeste insisted that His Majesty was showing concern. After all, it was only served for two, which had never happened before. Hilaria wondered what had caused such attention from the emperor, her status or something else. Meanwhile, the maid spoke enthusiastically about the unsurpassed chef in the East Wing, expressing confidence that the princess would enjoy his dishes. Hilaria was delighted with the delicious food and informed the maid about the guest's visit the next day. She asked her to prepare for the meeting with the Marquis's daughter Genesis. Celeste tried to remember something about the noble family, wondering what the reason for the visit was, influence or good relations between their principalities. The princess announced the imminent visit of a doctor, who, as expected, diagnosed the fragile lady with ordinary motion sickness. Celeste confirmed the princess's words, who in turn shifted the entire burden of responsibility onto her, ordering her to resolve all issues on her own. Watching Hilaria, the girl couldn't take her eyes off her, reflecting on her extraordinary charisma, which was difficult to convey in words. After all, she resembled the legendary Red Queen Guinevere, about whom incredible stories were told. The next morning, the emperor shared breakfast with Hilaria. At the breakfast table, amidst the exquisite dishes, she recalled everything that was known about him. Ibena Infred, a young ruler, ascended the throne at the age of 15, swiftly snatching the reins of power from the hands of the widowed empress mother. This drastic change sparked lively discussions in society, and many noted a shift in state governance compared to his predecessor. Legends spread about his beauty and extraordinary talents, which the emperor himself considered nothing more than empty praise. For the princess, Those conversations remained the only source of knowledge about the mysterious ruler with whom fate had brought her that morning. Suddenly, Eben asked why she hadn't eaten. Hilaria mentally expressed her displeasure at his morning smile, which was a contrast to her own swollen face, while he simply shone. The princess, assuring herself that she was eating, began to eat the salad with appetite. Watching her, the emperor found her quite lovely, and dismissing Swain's fears, he did not consider her the dangerous witch he took her to be. He was pleased to see her appetite. He was told about her illness. Hilaria assured him that she felt much better after sleep, thanking him for his concern. In response, he smiled with relief, as if addressing her father, and he insisted that she eat well and always be healthy. The princess, having accepted the advice, continued to eat breakfast, noticing that his smile did not touch his cold, soulless eyes, and his skin seemed to be blowing cold. After making sure that she was feeling better, Eben expressed his desire for her to spend the next night with him, hinting that otherwise her position as a concubine would not be taken seriously. At first, fear flashed in the princess's eyes, but she, after thanking him for the offer, was forced to refuse his majesty, which surprised him greatly. Hilaria explained her refusal by not wanting to be one of many, emphasizing her desire for special treatment. The firmness of her character aroused the emperor's interest, and he expressed his willingness to learn how to please her, assuring her that his power was unlimited, and he can even immediately proclaim her empress, accompanying his words with a demonstrative gesture in her direction. The princess froze at his words. Frowning, she pondered his audacity to threaten her, as if her life depended entirely on his will. The Dowager Empress gathered around her an influential aristocracy. She openly opposed the principality of Hilaria, not wanting to become a target for her possible intrigues. The princess smiled and assured that a fragile woman like her was not interested in high position. Hilaria noted that she had a jealous nature and a tendency to waste money, which would inevitably tarnish the imperial reputation. But it didn't matter to him, because she was enough to be his beautiful ornament. Gently pushing back a strand of her hair, he smiled gently. Hilaria sensed a hidden warning in that gesture. The usurper to the imperial throne would become a mere decoration, like a flower or a jewel. Therefore, she sharply denied any desire to occupy a high position, expressing a respectful address to His Majesty. Then the princess dared to ask Eben to promise to fulfill her small request in the future. The emperor was interested in this offer. Hilaria assured him that she could do anything and would get him what he wanted most of all, the old raccoon. The emperor was quite surprised by this. She knew about the existence of that animal in the castle and smiled confidently as she concluded her speech. The emperor laughed sarcastically, remarking on her penchant for dangerous games. But her persistence made him think about her ability to endure a difficult situation. What prompted Hilary to express her willingness to trust her and wait? Because his word carried great weight. She was delighted with the success of her plan and thanked him. The ruler, calmly sipping his tea, remarked on the desirability of mutual benefit. However, the princess asked in confusion about the need to meet the Dowager Empress. It seemed to him that she had directly asked for his protection, emphasizing the audacity of such a request, even for Charlotte. Intrigued by her boldness, Eben ordered her to stay and forbade the meeting. Hilaria joyfully expressed her submission with a clap of her hands. Her magical butterfly crashed just as it reached him. This confirmed her suspicions about the protection against magic, but fortunately he didn't suspect anything. Eben, watching the princess, felt her special attraction, and he thought that time would be interesting to spend with her. Meanwhile, in her luxurious bedroom, a tired Hilaria leaned back in her soft chair with relief. After all, breakfast with the emperor had been eventful, although it cost her a few dresses. However, the most important thing was left out. Butterflies appeared from the drawer of the table, offering her a book. An alert Kate worried that someone might witness her communication with the spirits. But the princess gave a reassuring wink. They were alone, and her butterflies were guarding the room. The assistant was surprised to see that the butterflies were watching the entire room. After all, she was worried about the excessive consumption of magical energy, of which there were not many crystals left. Later, the princess remembered the need for money so as not to depend on Baron Genesis's help. The assistant asked about the purpose of the funds. Hilaria explained that they were needed to catch a raccoon, and the amount was significant. The information about the empire she had been gathering before arriving included information, which were obtained with the help of a magic bullet, her main trump card. as well as data on the illegal arms trade. In those turbulent times, when influential clans secretly traded weapons, Hilaria considered the possibility of gaining access to the underground business, to legalize trade and establish the supply of weapons to the imperial castle. As the empire prepared for war, Kate was shocked by the lady's ambitions, but the princess considered it the perfect solution. The assistant insisted on the danger of the plan. Hilaria believed that legalizing supplies would reliably improve her situation. Paying the taxes that officials had been embezzling would achieve two goals. Kate was troubled by these dangerous thoughts. So Her Highness decided to hold a tea party. The assistant asked about the guests. A calm smile lit up the princess's face as she asked to wait. The one to whom she would reveal her plans would soon arrive. Within the walls of another castle, one of the concubines was imperiously giving orders to her maid Ajura. Bring the newcomer to her. The girl, bowing her head submissively, listened attentively. Her mistress was internally seething with envy, because she had appeared in those chambers later than everyone else. The fair-haired concubine was outraged by the audacity of the one who dared to share breakfast with the emperor. She longed to see the face of the impudent princess. The noise angered the head maid. Her assistant said that Ajura from the Canary Palace had picked a fight with their girls. One of the assistants was furious at such audacity. If Her Highness Charlotte wanted a meeting, she should have made an appointment and come in person. However, the head maid from the Canary Palace did not back down, not understanding what the rudeness was, and insisting that Mrs. Hilaria herself should visit her mistress. The Steel Rose's assistant was surprised. After all, there had been no prior agreement. Ajura had insisted that everyone was waiting in their palace, but the maid denied the possibility of such unexpected visits with demands. Their argument was interrupted by Celeste. She ordered a jury to appear before Her Highness, who was already waiting. The girl slowly entered the chambers. The princess, without looking up from her tea, invited the maid to come in. She bowed low and introduced herself as Ajura, Lady Charlotte's maid. And she hastened to apologize for her harshness, explaining her mistress's desire to see a new concubine. Hilaria, understanding who she was talking about, calmly listened to her further words. Ajura offered to take her to the Canary Palace where her mistress was waiting. Hilaria's commanding voice called her closer. The maid, surprised by this tone, asked in confusion what had happened. Feeling the tension instantly hanging in the air, with barely perceptible displeasure, the princess repeated her request. She made it clear that she did not tolerate repetition, and casting a look of superiority at Ajura, she again ordered her to come forward, calling her name. The girl shuddered in fear. Hilaria mentally noted her fright, wondering how much longer she would have to observe that preemptive posture. In the northern wing of Vladislav Castle lived Revelia Infred, the stepmother of Emperor Eben. Her gaze, full of bitterness, was fixed on the distance beyond the window. A heavy sigh escaped her lips, for she felt that even the youngest concubines did not show her due respect. Meanwhile, in the cozy atmosphere of the tea ceremony, Count Erasmus, the father of Olivia's concubine, shared his thoughts with Revelia. He emphasized that the young girl was exactly the one Guinevere was so proud of, and he insisted on the need to put her in her place. No concubine could match the status of the Empress Mother. The Count assured her that Revelia had only to show her will, and she would easily achieve her goals. His words dispelled Revelia's sadness. She settled comfortably on the sofa and agreed with his arguments. The Count continued to reassure the woman, noting that taming that concubine would open the way to influence Guinevere himself. The Empress sincerely hoped for such a development of events. After all, according to the imperial decree, her position in the palace was the highest. Erasmus confirmed her words. Her Highness the Empress then expressed a desire to meet his daughter Olivia. In response to his clarifying question, Revelia confirmed her intention, explaining that the girl, as a concubine, would be a convenient link to further establish contact with Eben, since the girl was distinguished by intelligence and patience, in which the Empress firmly believed. The Count did not object, confirming the words of Her Highness, but he expressed gratitude for the trust in his daughter, understanding that this would strengthen their positions at court. The fate of their clan depended on whose side they chose, and the young emperor was no match for such an influential figure as the Empress Mother. In the Steel Rose Palace, the frightened Ajura timidly approached the princess, as she had requested, and asked what Her Majesty wished to know. Hilaria cautiously inquired about the concubine Venice, trying to find out who had treated her to the cake that had caused the poisoning. Ajura turned pale, her body trembling. She rubbed her hands nervously, not understanding how the lady knew about the incident. After all, the concubine Venezia had died a few months earlier, and the details of her death remained unknown. Only the perpetrators knew about the cake poisoning. The maid was silent for a moment. The princess, smiling faintly, reassured her, assuring her that she had not told anyone about the concubine. The confused girl bowed low. But Hilaria, in an authoritative voice, ordered her to kneel down and not to behave so impudently again. Ajura, terrified, suddenly fell to her knees before Her Highness, her eyes filled with tears, begging for forgiveness, seeking mercy. The princess watched the scene, drawing a conclusion. Judging by the maid's fright, the most influential among the concubines was Charlotte. She thought so. She would be the one who could be entrusted with organizing the tea party. Suddenly, she called Ajura, who was attentively waiting for her words. Hilaria asked why she had come. The confused maid explained that her mistress and other concubines wished to see the princess and were waiting at the Canary Palace. The princess asked indignantly what was the matter. The confused girl asked what exactly was meant. In a firm tone that did not allow for any objections, Hilaria made her remarks. For her manner of answering questions with questions, reminded of her status as princess of the Principality of Guinevere, she questioned the superior status of her mistress. With a trembling voice, Ajura assured her mistress of the absence of any status. She also denied the princess's words. However, Hilaria insisted that she had the impression that her mistress had the right to tell who could come and who could not. Ajura's attempts to explain were interrupted by the princess, who emphasized that as a senior servant, she should understand what to convey to her mistress. The frightened assistant guessed. Then the princess praised her for her understanding and let her go, referring to the cooled tea. She bowed low, turned, and quickly left. Kate sighed with relief, glad that the conversation had ended successfully. The princess returned to her assistants, who assured her that nothing special had happened. Although it seemed to her that they had said something, Ajura walked with a pounding heart, feeling the princess's piercing gaze, which seemed to still be with her. Recalling the recent rumors about Lady Charlotte, the maid was sure of her rightness. Approaching the enchanted princess, she felt only humility. Hearing of her young age, Ajura marveled at her strength of spirit. Returning with nothing might have angered the lady, but it seemed like the best option. Then to find himself again under the power of a new concubine. In the castle of Vladislav, a wind of change was felt, heralding something new. A crimson wind named Hilaria. Beatrice's carriage was approaching rapidly. She was whispering impatiently about her imminent meeting with Hilaria, hoping that she was acting quietly, without any problems. A conversation was going on in the east wing of Vladislav's palace. Austin tried to understand the reason for the ruler's unusual joy. Eben, smiling, asked if he had heard the castle gossip, how the princess had humiliated Ajura by forcing her to her knees. His servant nodded slightly, confirming the event. After breakfast, the emperor's interest in Hilaria grew incredibly. All day long, the palace was the center of attention. The emperor admitted that with her appearance in the palace, he was overcome by unexpected joy, and he looked forward to further events. His servant foresaw how Hilaria would stir up the entire palace, not even sparing the empress mother. There was still relative balance among the concubines. The guest, patting Svein on the shoulder in a friendly way, assured him that there was something to think about. The guest turned out to be Vanette Clarinet, Duke Clarinet. He was interested in the new concubine. He believed that she would be a breath of fresh air in the stale atmosphere of the court. The emperor was surprised by the duke's words, who knew of her descent from the Guinevere family. Eben confirmed her uniqueness among other concubines. He told the men that the princess had asked for an unusual favor, to catch a raccoon in exchange for her attention. Her tall stature, eloquent gaze, and gracefulness were so charming that to Eben she seemed like a delicate rosebud about to bloom. The servant warned the emperor that Lady Charlotte would hardly remain indifferent, and her reaction was unpredictable. The lord smiled and reassured him, reminding him that Princess Hilaria was not easy either. This annoyed Austin. They expected the inevitable conflict, and he was mentally preparing for new scandals related to Hilaria Guinevere. Meanwhile, an elegant carriage rolled up to the Steel Rose Palace. A lady elegantly dressed in a blue dress and with pink hair emerged from it. It was Beatrice Genesis, the sole heiress of a noble family. She looked around. Celester greeted her with a welcoming smile. The lady knew about the girl's service to the princess, and she confirmed everything. Then the guest asked her to take good care of Her Highness. After all, This is her first time in the imperial castle. Adaptation will be difficult due to her life only in the principality and lack of social experience. The head maid looked at Beatrice in surprise, impressed by her words. The smiling lady asked her to support and help the princess. The girl couldn't figure out exactly what kind of naive person in human relations she was talking about, remembering the princess's own behavior with Ajura and the others. The guest called her assistant Urina, who brought the large box they had brought. Opening it, Celeste saw a necklace and earrings. Beatrice reported the other jewelry in the box and asked if they needed to be checked. The maid assured her that it was enough and invited them in. When the door to Hilaria's chambers opened, Milady rushed towards her with joyful hugs and exclamations, expressing her joy at the long-awaited meeting. The princess gently asked Bibi to be quieter. She noticed her friend's weight loss. Hilaria objected, claiming that she felt great in her new place. Her Highness ordered Celeste to bring them black tea with milk and syrup. The maid obediently went to fulfill her request. As soon as the door closed behind the maid, Beatrice wondered if the princess had resorted to the magic ball to verify the veracity of certain rumors. Hilaria invited the guests to sit down. She explained that a thorough investigation was necessary, as she had found confirmation in other ways. First, the number of horses sold by Arkan had halved, and there were rumors about the poor condition of the animals. This coincided with the beginning of the attack by the Zakari tribe, which, lacking proper weapons, attacked with cavalry and inflicted significant losses. The princess assumed that Erkin was trying to strike at Guinevere with the help of the tribe, and he would probably enter into a conspiracy with Oswald, which worried her greatly. Oswald always had imperial ambitions, and his possible union with Erkin was the most worrying. It could have led to war. They were probably preparing, and it would be difficult to stop her. The princess saw the only way to prevent the destruction of the principality in the unification of Guinevere and the empire. Beatrice, without a doubt, had complete confidence in the princess's prudence. She asked about possible assistance on her part. The princess turned to Milady with an unusual request, to investigate a clan involved in the illegal arms trade. Beatrice was surprised, realizing the potential danger of the task. In response, Her Highness assured her that there was a carefully thought-out plan, and she expressed her desire to start with tea. After all, her status as a new concubine provided ample reason for that. However, before the event it was necessary to gather some information, namely to check on the Duke of Clarnay and Count Nartan. Hilaria was aware of their considerable influence, so she believed that obtaining compromising information on them with Beatrice's help would be especially valuable. The idea seemed intriguing to Milady. She agreed, asking about the date of the tea party. Meanwhile, the princess promised Kate to restore order at court. Hilaria was pleased to examine the magic crystals that had been brought. There should be enough for another 2 months. The head maid did not notice the rest of the contents of the chests. The princess noted the high quality of the crystals. Beatrice assured her that their extraction had cost considerable effort and asked her to wait, promising new supplies. She bought a deserted island rich in those crystals and isn't sure how many there are. She promised to bring more as soon as they're mined. Hilaria, deeply touched by Milady's understanding, felt boundless gratitude. Her face lit up with a smile that silently spoke of affection. At the Canary Castle, a maid entered Charlotte's chambers. The first concubine, enraged by her empty-handedness, contemptuously called her worthless. Hilaria and Milady enjoyed tea in a pleasant atmosphere. Beatrice savored the treats with appetite. The princess generously offered her treats, wanting her friend to feel at ease. The guest asked her about her impressions of meeting the emperor. Her Highness began to describe him, but Beatrice interrupted her. Then she thought that a compliment on the emperor's appearance would provoke jokes from Milady, so she replied that he seemed a bit dangerous to her. The surprised friend asked if that was why she had refused the lord the chance to spend the night with him. The princess did not like to share a bed with anyone. Hearing this, Celeste mentally remarked that the emperor was an extraordinary person. Beatrice warned Her Highness about the possible fainting of the other concubines if they heard her words. She asked if Hilaria knew about the upcoming ball in honor of the empress's birthday, which would be held in a month. The princess, with a slight smile, made it clear that she was aware of everything. Milady delicately inquired about the prepared gift. Hilaria admitted that she had not yet dealt with the issue, but she assured that the gift would be very beautiful and worthy. The Canary Palace was filled with the sound of broken dishes, a sign of Charlotte's fury. She screamed in surprise at the appearance of the impudent girl. The concubine was taking out her anger on the maid who had put her in an awkward position. Ajura blushed from the slap, begging for forgiveness. Charlotte's anger echoed through the palace. She was outraged by the audacity of a commoner who dared to insult her. Until now, all the concubines had shown her the utmost respect. However, one morning everything changed dramatically because of a certain Hilaria. The maid timidly remarked that the princess was not like other concubines. Because she was very dangerous, she advised the lady to be careful. However, this only increased Charlotte's anger, who continued to throw dishes at her, not understanding whether the girl realized what she was saying. She was outraged that Ajura, who had failed the task, still dared to lecture and expressed doubts about her long-term service. The maid was afraid that the princess would reveal her mistress's weaknesses. After all, with such a temper, she would hardly be able to hold out for long. Therefore, Charlotte ordered her to convey to the Steel Rose Palace the news of her personal visit the next day. The frightened maid unquestioningly carried out the order. The blonde was filled with determination to show Hilaria her true place and force her to kneel. The next morning, the princess admired her reflection. The maids did not skimp on compliments, enthusiastically praising her beauty. She noted Celeste's skill without surprise. In high society, the ability to follow fashion was a guarantee of attention. Style played an important role in social life. Looking at herself in the mirror, Hilaria was pleased with her hairstyle and the look her assistant had created. Straightening up, she turned around several times, feeling an inner readiness for the upcoming collision. Her Highness asked Kate for support, clenching her fists for her lady, whom she considered the best and capable of victory. She assured her that everything would be fine. The princess thanked both maids, and with a sense of determination, she went to the drawing room with Charlotte to meet the unknown. There was a tense silence at the large tea table. The princess noticed that Charlotte had been silent for quite a long time, which was not in keeping with her impulsive nature. Suddenly, a sharp voice broke the silence. The first concubine apologized to the princess for yesterday's incident. Her Highness, with a slight smile, expressed her hope for establishing friendly relations with Charlotte. However, she did not reciprocate, demonstrating restraint. The blonde knew about the princess's recent arrival and her ignorance of palace affairs. She assured that she was ready to help her and become a mentor, hoping that this would benefit young Hilaria. The corners of the princess's lips slightly lifted, mentally mocking Charlotte's politeness. She admitted that she was indeed experiencing difficulties with adaptation. Hilaria placed her hand on the blonde's hand, asking for help in mastering the palace rules, and even in changing them, which irritated Charlotte. However, she continued to smile regardless, expressing confidence in her ability to cope with the task perfectly. Peace in the palace would only come if they were in agreement. The princess expressed her hope that the words were right, not letting go of her hand. In a seemingly polite tone, Charlotte asked how a person who grew up in a remote village could influence the structure of a great empire. After all, in her opinion, this should be done by a person who possessed the appropriate knowledge and skills, and not just a bearer of the title of princess. Her Highness remained calm. A smile never left her face. She told Charlotte that her arrival had nothing to do with a quiet stay in the shadows. She didn't have time for the constant comforting of a capricious child, whom she apparently considered a concubine. In addition, the princess hinted that it seemed that the maid had not conveyed to the blonde the information about her knowledge of the secret of Venice's death. Charlotte instantly tensed up. Her Highness assured her that revealing that secret would not result in a prison sentence for her, and besides her, many others will suffer the deserved retribution. It was pointless to deny it further, Hilaria emphasized. The more insolent Charlotte became, the more her patience ran out. The concubine's maid watched with alarm at the unexpected turn of events. The princess emphasized that her future would depend solely on her choice, and she expressed a sincere desire to establish friendly relations. Suddenly, Charlotte abruptly pulled her hand away. Her Highness, in a calm voice, assured her that there was no intention of harm at the moment. Extending her hand with feigned tenderness and sincerity, Hilaria offered to become her friend, hoping for mutual trust and support. Charlotte believed that the princess was unaware of all the circumstances of Venice's tragic death. Due to her excessive haste, she maintained an impassive expression. She said she was open to becoming friends. Initially, she intended to play along with the princess. Hilaria clapped her hands, expressing her sincere joy and gratitude. Now she felt she had an opportunity to ask her one request. The princess explained that she had wanted to host a tea party for guests at the palace. But unfortunately, she did not have enough experience in organizing such events. That's why Charlotte's help was so valuable to her. With hope in her voice, she asked if she would agree to help her with that matter. The concubine agreed without hesitation. The princess felt sincere gratitude, and it seemed that she managed to curb her excessive self-confidence at least a little. Taking a delicate flower from a crystal vase, Hilaria slowly began the conversation. That first of all, she wanted to get to know the other two concubines. Charlotte kindly offered to arrange a meeting the next day, if Her Highness had free time. The princess was pleased with such promptness, and the idea appealed to her. For Charlotte, this development of events was very beneficial. A cunning idea had already formed in her head: to immediately send secret letters to both concubines with a persistent request to deny the princess a meeting. She was confident in her power over them. The concubines would unquestioningly obey her, not her new favorite. Charlotte was determined to teach the princess a tangible lesson by thwarting her plans and showing her powerlessness. Hilaria was relieved to receive her agreement to help, believing it would help her overcome any doubts she might have about her ability to organize the event, especially considering her own ignorance in such matters, and Charlotte's considerable influence. She felt the need for support and guidance. Looking at her interlocutor, the princess broke a flower, expressing confidence that the other concubines would listen to Charlotte. She remarked in passing about the fragility of the flowers. This demonstration alarmed her. She wondered whether to immediately implement her plan, perhaps postpone it. Charlotte expressed confidence that the princess would be able to make a pleasant impression on the other concubines, and promised to talk to them. Hilaria only smiled in response, feeling that her plan was being implemented. However, her thoughts were focused on the emperor with a cold smile. Even her butterfly could not penetrate his room, where there was a certain oppressive atmosphere. She wondered about Eben's mysterious personality. Late in the evening, Swain brought the news to the emperor. He asked if His Majesty knew about the events, having received an invitation to enter. He told about the information that the sovereign had already received from Veneko, that the princess had managed to put even Charlotte in her place. The servant expressed surprise and suggested that the conflict would not end so quickly, since the lady would hardly forgive such behavior. When the emperor was asked about his position, he did not support either side. After all, Charlotte always had her own opinion and opposed the empress. But Hilaria attracted the earl's attention and affection. Eben was surprised by his half-sister's lack of support. Vanik replied that, according to the servant, it was the first time he had witnessed such influence at court. He also emphasized his sister's inability to take decisive action. The ruler, with a smile, recalled that he knew about the princess's acquaintance with Lady Beatrice Genesis, whom she had invited to the palace. They studied together at the Lyon Academy. He was surprised by the decision of an influential family to send their only daughter to study far away, which he considered unusual. The princess and her friend raised some doubts. He was also moved to support her. Eben seemed to have a special appeal to the new concubine. Swain was alarmed, wondering if the rumors about her possible use of magic were true. However, the earl assured him that magic was not a threat to him. The rumor of her intention to hold a tea party instantly reached the emperor. The servant confirmed it and added that she had turned to Charlotte for help. Since the new concubine decided to host a tea party, Eben decided to prepare a suitable gift for her. This turn of events surprised Swain. He noted that usually His Majesty did not pay attention to such matters. However, he assured her that this was a reward for her ability to cheer him up, and he ordered something to be prepared that was befitting her status. Undoubtedly, such a reception was to strengthen her position. The emperor was eagerly awaiting the event that was to bring about change. Hilaria was in her private chambers, absorbed in studying important documents. She turned to her maid with a question. Celeste listened attentively as the princess inquired about Miss Olivia, trying to ascertain her possible connections with the empress. Despite her influential position at court, Mrs. reputation left much to be desired. The maid assured her that she was distinguished by insatiable greed. Olivia was prone to excessive spending, and she stopped at nothing to satisfy her own whims. Celeste recalled the incident when the princess and the emperor were having breakfast. Miss was filled with rage and even took her anger out on her own maid. Hilaria found her temperament extremely hot-tempered. The conversation then turned to Count Erasmus, who was rumored to have moved to the capital, exclusively for the sake of his only daughter, and he was ready for any sacrifices, because the fate of their entire family depended on her future. Her Highness also expressed curiosity about the concubine Jane. The maid reported that the lady was neutral. Although she maintained communication with Lady Charlotte, she had a close connection with the Empress, who was on hostile terms with the blonde. Jane was distinguished by her silence and kept away from the court bustle, always demonstrating extreme modesty. Even the princess's magical butterflies did not notice her leaving the chambers. However, the future persistently indicated to Hilaria the need to meet her. After thanking Celeste, she dismissed the maid with a slight nod. Left alone, her thoughts swirled in deep contemplation. The next day, the princess sincerely thanked the concubines for their willingness to accept her invitation. She beamed with a smile as she met each of them. Hilaria gratefully acknowledged the presence of each lady at her spontaneous tea party, expressing her sincere joy at their company. She smiled, realizing that she had not turned to Charlotte for help in vain. The concubine confirmed that she had acted on her instructions. However, there was a faint hint of sadness in her gaze. The princess felt that their conversation had touched her, who was still trying to maintain her influence. Charlotte sat silently with her head bowed, turning away from everyone. She slowly sipped her tea, looking away. Suddenly, Hilaria turned to Lady Jane with words of gratitude, noting that it had been very pleasant to meet her. Miss only nodded in response, expressing mutual joy. Contrary to rumors, she seemed very quiet to the princess. However, Hilaria noticed excessively protruding joints and calluses on her hands, which indicated her passion for fencing. Usually, ladies from aristocratic families have delicate and well-groomed hands, so she decided to talk to her later, separately. Meanwhile, Olivia kept her displeased gaze on the princess. It seemed to her that this behavior had always been characteristic of Jane, but Charlotte's silence remained a mystery to her. After all, since last night, everything had gone completely differently than she had expected. The whole situation seemed to her like a senseless farce. The strange letter from Charlotte and the intrusiveness of her new concubine irritated her. The previous evening at Begonia Palace, the conversation between father and daughter had been tense. Outraged by her father's prolonged absence, Olivia demanded an explanation. He referred to the numerous events in the castle caused by the arrival of a new concubine. Olivia persistently tried to find out. Did he know about her intrigues? But he cautiously reassured her, fearing to be overheard by the emperor. She pointedly showed Charlotte a letter, calling her crazy, and in anger she exclaimed that everyone around her had lost their minds. The father calmly denied her words, assuring her that Guinevere was just a forgotten province and posed no threat to his daughter. Olivia flared up, denying that it wasn't the threat from her new concubine that bothered her, but her obsession, which irritated her unbearably. The man continued to comfort her, reminding her of the widespread rumors about the princess's witch-like appearance, which terrified everyone who saw her. However, the girl could not understand why the emperor showed such interest in her, even to the point of having breakfast together. Her father suggested that Hilaria was bewitching people, perhaps by casting magical spells. Her daughter knew that the days of witch hunts were long gone, and it seems that the new concubine was only skilled at weaving intrigues. However, even Charlotte succumbed to her influence, which seemed extremely suspicious to her, and the princess's invitation to the Steel Rose Palace did not please Olivia at all. The husband had heard the first concubine bragging about her noble origin. She intended to destroy the new concubine. Therefore, he assured his daughter not to worry. After all, the Empress herself had promised to send the ruler to her. Olivia expressed her irritation again about her father's constant reassurances with empty promises. After all, the emperor never appeared. In a calm tone, he advised his daughter not to give in to anger, which was damaging her beauty. Her husband assured her that the time would come when she would become empress, giving him an heir. Olivia saw no point in living without the emperor. Neither love potions nor healing herbs for future pregnancy. Nothing brought the desired result. He understood her long wait and deep fatigue, so he gently inquired about her mood. It was at this moment that the maid presented an elegant box. Opening it, Olivia held her breath as she saw a topaz of extraordinary beauty, brought by her father from distant Osphalt. A jewel that could not be found in Infred. She was amazed and surprised how he managed to get such a treasure. Smiling, he assured her that he was ready for anything for her. Therefore, he asked her to trust him and be a little more patient. Sighing, the daughter thanked him, admiring the glow of the stone. He added that the Empress was not delighted with the new concubine and expressed her concern. Olivia was surprised and asked if Her Highness had brought her something this time. After all, Her father always brought her something from her after visits. Just like on that fateful day when she gave Charlotte's maid a poisoned cake. The naive blonde still had no idea who had poisoned her. The father nervously assured her that nothing special had happened. The Empress cherished the hope of getting rid of Princess Guinevere in the palace. The daughter asked if it was forever, and he confirmed it. The princess became like a bone in her throat for her, and she wanted his daughter as closer to the concubine to put an end to it. Olivia agreed without hesitation, feeling the Empress's trust. So her thoughts were filled with the question of how to expel that girl. For the Venice family, shady dealings were commonplace. She wanted to find some sin for Guinevere that would get her kicked out of the imperial castle. She asked her father to gather all possible information about her clan, childhood, secrets, even the smallest rumors. He agreed and promised to get the necessary information. Then his daughter promised him that she would rescue that girl from the palace at any cost. Olivia had sworn an oath yesterday. Staring intently at the princess, she thought that hilarious time in the palace would soon be over, and she would take care of it. Miss turned to the princess, emphasizing that the rumors about her poor upbringing were confirmed. She stunned the other concubines with her audacity. She noticed that Hilaria, upon arriving at the imperial castle, should have been the first to visit them, not ignored. Now she invited them to tea, casually expressing her pleasure at meeting them. Olivia emphasized the vast difference in their upbringing, regardless of where the princess grew up, and expressed surprise at the lack of basic rules of etiquette in Guinevere's principality. The princess skillfully portrayed her astonishment, and then responded with a barely perceptible smile, hiding her true emotions behind a mask of politeness. In the principality of Guinevere, anxiety reigned over Hilaria's fate. The young man was worried, understanding how difficult it would be for her to adapt to life in the imperial castle. And with regret, the young lady imagined all the difficulties she would have to face. However, the woman tried to calm them down. She assured that behind the outward modesty and tenderness of their princess was a sharp mind, which would certainly help her cope. There was a faint note of alarm in her voice. The count reminded her that, according to their laws, the people of Guinevere had no right to cross the threshold of the imperial castle. He expressed relief that at least Beatrice was in the capital to support the princess, and he sincerely hoped that everything would be fine with her in a harsh place. The Steel Rose Garden was already in the midst of a lively concubine tea party. Kate could not hide her excitement. Celester asked her about her worries, to which she confidently replied that no one would disturb her mistress. There was not a single soul of her own kind among the people present. The head maid thought for a moment, remembering the widespread rumors about Lady Olivia's noble origin, and she doubted the peaceful course of events. Meanwhile, Hilaria smiled gently at those present, and noted that the imperial castle was an extremely interesting place, where she met many wonderful people. Olivia asked with undisguised irony if they were really that interesting. The princess confidently replied that they wouldn't be bored here. And turning to the lady, she reminded her of her promise to help her better understand life in the castle. Charlotte silently bowed her head in confirmation. Her Highness continued that she felt safe, calmly stating that the Emperor desired peace among all, then peace would reign in the castle as well. So she wanted to hear Lady Charlotte's advice on how to deal with a person whose behavior bordered on madness, and who was completely out of touch with reality. Olivia was shocked by those words. She stood up abruptly and exclaimed indignantly that she did not understand. After all, it was the princess's behavior, not hers, that was inadequate. The indignant girl turned sharply to the first concubine, demanding to explain her silent presence in that absurdity. Charlotte was confused, realizing that she had fallen into a cunning trap. It became clear to her why the princess had insisted on tea. She did not foresee such a turn of events, and she understood that any reaction she had would lead to a worsening of her situation. Tensions were mounting, and no decision was forthcoming. Charlotte recalled how the arrival of each new concubine had sparked minor arguments over seniority. However, the established order remained unbroken, until the last of the newly arrived concubines shook the peace of the castle. Not only she but all the other ladies watched Hilaria with wariness. Even Olivia could not match the status of the princess of the principality. Therefore, Charlotte decided that the only way to maintain her own position was to politely address the hot-tempered concubine. It was unpleasant for her to listen to her angry outbursts. After all, Hilaria had expressed a sincere desire to establish friendly relations with all of them, And it was with that purpose that she proposed to host a tea party. Although Her Highness had only recently arrived, she was still the princess of a powerful principality. The blonde emphasized the due respect for her status. Olivia exclaimed indignantly that her words sounded like a demand for her to apologize to the princess. Hilaria mentally noted Charlotte's skill in trying to defuse the tense situation. She could have sided with Olivia, whom she had known longer, but circumstances demanded that the pressure be increased on her. For example, mentioning the death of Venice. It was not just an accident but a carefully planned murder. Rumor has it that the eldest concubine who brought the poisoned cake was to blame. She was probably framed. After the lady's death, her family, the Sebastian clan, went bankrupt. They were accused of corruption, and it was Olivia's family that benefited the most. The concubine died. Her family became extinct. This unpleasant secret was kept secret, but only until the living descendant of the Sebastians demanded revenge on the emperor. He spread dirty rumors about Guinevere, turning her principality into bait for Infred, putting him on the verge of death. To prevent this, the princess transported the concubine's family to Guinevere and kept them under close surveillance until they were reported, to preserve the integrity and security of the principality during her absence. Despite knowing the deceased, her own family was most important to her. Suddenly, their quiet tea idyll was interrupted by the commanding voice of Swain, calling the princess. He told her important news. His Majesty the Emperor intended to honor their company with his presence. Olivia could not hide her surprise at such an unexpected favor. The servant confirmed that the lord wished to honor the first of the concubines, Lady Hilaria, with his own person, and he would arrive to present her with a small gift. The news of the imperial visit filled the princess with an unexpected honor. Her thoughts were clouded by a lack of understanding of the true reason for such attention. She wondered why that event happened at that exact moment, and why the emperor had expressed a desire for other concubines to witness his gift. His words about hoping for their dreams to come true echoed in her mind. She wondered if he was trying to provoke her. Hilaria noticed the instant change in the expressions on the faces of the other concubines. Realizing the imprudence of the emperor's refusal, she decided to accept His Majesty's rules of the game, internally preparing to show him the desired reaction. Her Highness thanked Swain for the unexpected warning, emphasizing their duty to shine before the emperor. Her words, especially addressed to Lady Olivia, contained an appeal to set aside any quarrels, for they should not grieve the distinguished guest with their discord. This expressed the princess's sincere desire to resolve all the misunderstandings that had arisen between them during the conversation. Standing up, Hilaria announced a magical garden nearby. Its beauty, she said, had the power to dispel any storm in the heart. A slight smile touched her lips as she turned to Olivia with a proposal to take a walk through that blooming haven together. Miss was surprised by the unexpected initiative. The princess's true intentions remained a mystery to her. Why she needed their joint walk. But suddenly Olivia had a thought, that this unexpected offer could turn into something useful for her. Miss accepted the offer, politely suggesting that Lady Hilaria go ahead. They walked slowly towards the garden. The princess could not help but notice the splendor of the surrounding landscape. The garden struck with its beauty, reminiscent of the day of her first appearance in the Palace of the Steel Rose. However, a discontent crept into Olivia's thoughts. She mentally rebuked the princess for displaying garden magnificence at such a tense moment, remembering Charlotte's recent humiliation. It suddenly dawned on her that perhaps her worries were unfounded, and Hilaria looked foolish, admiring the flowers. Then her gaze inadvertently drifted to the shoes, barely visible from under the hem of Her Highness's dress. They were rare and undoubtedly expensive shoes, worth by her estimate about 200,000 gold. Her earrings and necklace seemed no less expensive, at least 300,000. The concubine assumed that Hilaria had collected those riches, bit by bit, even before arriving at the palace. It was unlikely that a village girl could possess such a fortune. The princess turned to her, pointing to the surface of the lake. Olivia involuntarily noted that the rumors turned out to be false. In her eyes, Hilaria had pretty features, far from the witchy image her father had painted. However, she did not notice the beauty described in her, that special charm that could captivate the heart of an emperor. In her opinion, even Venice could boast greater beauty. However, the fact remained that His Majesty was going to personally visit the princess to present her with a gift, and even share a cup of tea with her. Olivia's irritation was growing. She couldn't understand what was so special about this upstart that she didn't have. Hilaria announced their arrival. and the young ladies saw a wonderful lake spread out in the very heart of the palace courtyard. She asked the miss if she thought it was wonderful. The concubine was amazed, and had heard of the existence of a lake in the Steel Rose Palace. But its true size and beauty exceeded all her expectations. The girl was amazed that such a wonderful place had been reserved for Hilaria. A slight twinge of envy pricked her heart, but she immediately remembered the old saying that the more you have, the more humble you should be. As she spoke those words, the miss barely noticed her pushing Hilaria closer to the edge of the shore. And then she emphasized the emperor's justice. With feigned sincerity, she advised the princess to be more careful if she wanted to continue to enjoy his favor. Standing on the very edge, Olivia had already reached out her hand, waiting for another careless step from her. Emphasizing that her words were sincere concern and gratitude was unnecessary. Frowning, the miss added that she was doing it for Hilaria's own sake, and she pushed her sharply, intending to push her into the cool depths of the lake. However, the princess dodged with incredible speed, and Olivia herself lost her balance, inevitably falling into the water. But suddenly she didn't feel the damp coolness on her body. Confused, she couldn't understand why the inevitable fall didn't end with her drowning. Opening her eyes, the concubine saw Hilaria's face before her. She held her hand tightly, gently assuring her that everything was fine with the lady. Olivia was completely confused, not understanding where such a fragile figure came from, such extraordinary strength. In her thoughts, the princess smiled faintly, calling Miss Sweet in her predictability. After all, her inner thoughts and hidden intentions were like an open book to Her Highness. The concubine herself would never have guessed that from the very beginning of their walk, she had been surrounded by countless invisible butterflies. They obediently carried out Hilaria's will. At the tea party, her aggressive intentions could have become obvious. That was why she had chosen the lake as the location for their walk, because there she felt more in control of the situation, and mentally noted its predictability. Hilaria gently asked her to hold on tighter. The lady panicked and began to struggle desperately, screaming, calling her a monster. The princess couldn't understand the reason for such hysteria. She had saved her from falling. But if Olivia insisted so much, Her Highness slowly opened her fingers. With a piercing scream, the girl flew down, but again did not feel the cold moisture. She hovered over the mirror-like surface of the lake, completely confused and not understanding what was happening. The princess sighed softly, saying that Olivia's stubbornness and fuss were already starting to tire her and the butterflies. If the lady hadn't interfered with her insidious plans, she might have turned a blind eye to her hostility. Olivia did not stop expressing her indignation at the princess's actions. She shouted that she had always been honest and openly spoke her mind. Did Hilaria really think that her high status gave her the right to do anything? She was trying to show who really had the power, but she still couldn't understand why she didn't fall into the water. Maybe some invisible spell was holding her back. With despair in her voice, she began to beg to be lifted up. The princess rubbed her temples wearily. She no longer had the slightest desire to prove anything to that stubborn and unreasonable lady. Leaning closer to Olivia, who was hanging over the water, she asked quietly, "Did the girl really want the same fate as Venice?" Miss couldn't understand how Hilaria had found out about her crime. After all, she had punished everyone involved in the death. Despite rumors of the complete collapse of the Sebastian clan, if the secret gets out and reaches the emperor, Olivia will not escape a cruel retribution. She tried in vain to find out the source of the princess's knowledge of her secret activities, but in response, she received only a categorical order to remain silent. Hilaria promised to keep her secret, provided she would continue to act quietly and inconspicuously. However, the stubborn lady did not listen, raising his voice again and demanding silence from the princess herself, expressing his indignation in her tone. This finally deprived Her Highness of patience. The concubine suddenly realized she had lost control of the situation. The princess had not just learned her deepest secrets. Olivia was ready to end her life without hesitation. Her Highness had no idea what tricks could be expected from the reckless girl. With a heavy sigh and a barely perceptible movement of her hand, Hilaria made her final will clear. Instantly, the invisible support disappeared, and the lady with a terrible scream flew down, finally feeling the burning cold of the lake water. The princess watched her fall indifferently and without pity. Upon reaching the shore, Olivia burst into a frenzy of curses, calling her crazy and threatening revenge for her audacity. Hilaria's maids immediately ran up to her, alarmed by the lady's indecent behavior, which completely did not correspond to their ideas about ethical norms. She continued to shout, ignoring them and rudely demanding that they disappear immediately. But they insisted that the emperor was very close, and he shouldn't see her in such a miserable state. But the miss didn't care. Choking with anger, she screamed that Hilaria had pushed her. The princess feigned genuine surprise and fear, asking what incredible things Olivia was saying. On the contrary, she caught her when she almost fell. Hilaria explained that it was difficult for her to hold back the excited lady, who was desperately trying to get away. Therefore, unfortunately, she could not do anything. The concubine was shocked by such meanness and began to threaten. If she continued to allow herself to do such things, suddenly the emperor's commanding voice was heard, sternly ordering them to stop. Noting that quarrels and noise were completely inappropriate in the magnificent garden, Olivia froze at His Majesty's unexpected appearance. Feigning innocence, she turned to him with a request to judge them. She insisted that it was the princess who pushed her first, but the emperor cut her off abruptly, not tolerant of objections. He assured that everyone present, including himself, clearly saw how she herself carelessly fell into the water. Other concubines also came running to the noise. The lord severely rebuked her, noting that it was not fitting for a lady to shift the blame onto others because of her own shame for her clumsiness. The bewildered concubine tried to find an excuse for herself, but the emperor's stern voice, pierced by an icy gaze, instantly cut her off. He turned to the palace maids Begonia, ordering them to take the lady to her chambers so that she wouldn't freeze in such cool weather. The maids immediately ran over with dry towels and began to dry Olivia, who was burning with rage, casting vengeful glances at the princess. With the help of her maids, she set off for her palace. Other concubines hurried after her, casting timid glances at the ruler and Hilaria. The embarrassed princess thanked His Majesty for his timely intervention, and awkwardly admitted her confusion. With a gentle smile, he assured her of his loyalty to the truth. But noticing her confusion, he suggested that she immediately return to the palace and rest. She looked at him intently. She thought there was a faint hint of irony in his voice. Her Highness calmly assured her that she was fine. Then the Lord reminded her of his promised gift, expressing the hope that it would bring her comfort. She thanked him, accepted the box, and carefully opened it. Seeing the contents, her memory instantly flashed back to Swain's words about the small gift. Inside it gleamed an extremely beautiful gold necklace, which was inlaid with a large yellow topaz. Hilaria sincerely exclaimed about the beauty of the necklace, looking straight into the emperor's eyes. He assured her that it was a special order, created especially for her, and he asked her if she thought the color of the topaz was strikingly similar to the shade of her eyes. The princess became wary, peering intently into his face. After all, the golden hue of her pupils only appeared when she controlled spirits. Unless she used a lot of force, the color would only change momentarily. However, lately she had had to use butterflies a lot in the palace, but she definitely didn't do that in front of him. She was confused as to how he could have known that. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but if not... With a strained smile, she informed the Lord. He must have confused her with someone else because her eyes had always been blue. Eben supported her game, agreeing with her words, but he assured her that he only meant the shape of the pendant, which vaguely resembled her eyes. She understood his hint. Yes, the shape did have a certain resemblance, but did he really mean only the shape? A disturbing doubt arose in her soul. The emperor asked Hilaria to allow him to personally put on the presented jewelry. She readily agreed, considering it a great honor. However, her thoughts flashed through his mind that he was busy, but for some reason he was delaying his departure. Taking a gold pendant from the box, the lord slowly approached the princess. His fingers touched the clasp of her necklace, unfastening it, and she felt the unexpected coldness of his hands. Tiny goosebumps ran across her skin, like the touch of icy breaths of spirits. Her own body was burning with great heat, and the emperor's skin seemed much colder than the warmth of an ordinary person. Hilaria thought he was deliberately procrastinating, taking things too slowly. Suddenly, his soft voice whispered a compliment in her ear about her beauty. The princess recoiled sharply from surprise, and awkwardly exclaimed with a respectful address to the emperor. He calmly assured her that everything was ready, noting how well the new jewelry suited her, expressing his satisfaction that his sense of style had not failed him. The princess watched him silently. Her gaze was filled with astonishment at His Majesty's unusual behavior. The emperor expressed his hope that she would like the necklace, and asked her not to regret her previous decoration. Hilaria couldn't tell if he was joking or not, so she just bowed low, thanking the Lord. She gracefully confirmed that she liked the gift. She assured me that she would wear it with joy, appreciating the attention and sincerity with which it was presented. Eben was pleased with her liking and said goodbye, noting that he had urgent matters to attend to, wishing her a pleasant time in the company of noble ladies. The princess tenderly spoke her farewell words, showing respect and restraint in her response to the ruler. Fanique stood nearby watching the princess intently. He still couldn't quite believe that he was really Hilaria. Her appearance seemed completely ordinary to him, devoid of the sinister aura that rumors attributed to her. However, her blue eyes seemed to him to be something extraordinary. Deep and bottomless like the abyss of the sea, they attracted his gaze like a magnet. Suddenly, the emperor's commanding voice snapped him out of his thoughts, asking where he was staring so intently. The duke instantly noticed the displeasure on his face. The embarrassed count muttered an apology to his majesty, assuring him that his thoughts had simply wandered and that he had no ill intentions. The emperor, with a faint smile, accepted his explanation. He knew very well that the man was incapable of such a mistake. He sternly warned him, ordering him to be more vigilant. Even the power of the ruler would not save him if he continued to spread rumors about the princess's strange behavior. With guilty submission, Vanique bowed his head, his lips whispering a promise of vigilance. At that moment, a strange feeling dawned on him. The emperor's attitude towards Princess Hilaria stood out from his usual affection for other concubines. He began to suspect that there was an invisible thread, a secret between them, carefully hidden from his understanding. Therefore, with caution, the count dared to remark to the emperor about his obvious special affection for the princess. However, the ruler chose the path of silence, not revealing the veil of his feelings. The imperious gesture prompted them to quicken their steps towards the eastern building. Hilaria, exhausted, collapsed onto the table in her chambers and sighed in exhaustion. Kate, handing over the magic crystals, made a sympathetic remark about the lady's difficult day. The princess nodded, ordering them to place the crystals and leave. When asked about their needs, she waved her hand, indicating that she was not to be disturbed. As she left the room, the maid could not suppress her anxiety, and in a whisper she asked the lady not to hesitate to call her if the slightest need arose. Deep down, Kate was troubled by a thought. Could she remain indifferent to the suffering of her exhausted mistress? Meeting the head maid Celester in the hallway, she conveyed the princess's words about wanting to rest and not be disturbed. The head assistant's face instantly filled with interest. She leaned closer to Kate and asked something quietly. Had she noticed any particular change in the relationship between the emperor and the princess? The girl raised her eyebrows in surprise, not understanding the hint. Then Celeste explained that, in her opinion, there had been a rapprochement between the ruler and the princess. As proof, she mentioned how His Majesty personally placed a precious necklace around Hilaria's neck, which seemed to her to be an extremely meaningful gesture. Embarrassed by her words, Kate shook her head in denial. She felt that no one truly understood her mistress's true nature. The princess was so unlike the others. But Celester expressed a quiet hope that the mutual affection between the emperor and her highness would bring good. Indignation boiled in the assistant's heart at those words. It seemed to her that the head maid was harboring the idea of such a development of events, which deeply saddened her. With a slight fright, Kate grabbed her hand and whispered a warning to her against careless talk. She thought of the princess's magical butterflies, which could fly everywhere, eavesdropping on everything, and assured the lady of her lack of interest in the lord, hoping to avoid undesirable consequences of the conversation. The magical butterfly instantly conveyed everything it heard to the emperor himself. His surprise knew no bounds when he heard about the princess's lack of interest in him. A slight sadness crept into his heart. After all, he had chosen a gift for her so carefully, hoping to arouse even a tiny spark of affection. Then he addressed the little messenger directly, confessing that it seemed to him that his mistress felt animosity towards him. He added thoughtfully how extraordinary a princess was to have power over the spirits of fire. Even though the butterfly was very tiny, it exuded a barely perceptible warmth of flame, making it look remarkably like its mysterious owner. Eben gently assured the trembling butterfly that it need not be afraid of him. After all, he had no intention of harming it. On the contrary, his plans were to make friends with this unusual creature. The butterfly, still cautious, perched on the edge of the table. The emperor did not want his new acquaintance to disappear. although it seemed that even if he had wanted to escape, he would not have succeeded. With a light snap of his fingers, the Lord created a miniature cage around the butterfly. A soft smile bloomed on his face. He noticed that they were not yet close, so the butterfly would have to suffer, and his eyes lit up with curiosity. He became very curious. What did that little messenger see and hear being constantly next to the princess? If they could truly become friends, he promised to give the butterfly its real name, and he even asked what it would like. Having pronounced the syllable hill, the emperor felt how pleasantly it resonated in his soul. He repeated the name with relish, and decided that this would be his name. In the silence of the Steel Rose Palace, Hilaria, her head bowed, thoughtfully contemplated the precious necklace given to her by the ruler. In vain she tried to understand the motives of his action. The answer stubbornly eluded her understanding. The inability to send butterflies to him only irritated her more. Suddenly, in her memory, a bright flash of that moment appeared, when his muffled voice whispered in her ear about her kindness. Anger flared up in her like a match. Hilaria was indignant at being called cute because she was charming. How could he say such a thing? Her whole figure trembled with anger. It seemed to her that he was simply mocking her, trying to see a shadow of fear on her face. But Eben was deeply mistaken if he thought she would accept such treatment. A firm intention was born in her resolute heart, to find his vulnerable spot, that one chink in his armor through which she could strike back. Reflecting on this, the princess could not shake off the feeling of strangeness. How Eben managed to ascend to the imperial throne, which was loved by the common people. Most of the influential aristocratic families gave their allegiance to Prince Nelson. Even the common people supported the son of the second empress. From a political point of view, taking his side and supporting his government seemed like a much smarter move. However, after the death of the previous emperor, the prince was unexpectedly sent into exile, and the crown unexpectedly ended up on Eben's head. Hilaria suspected that there might have been some unknown agreement between him and the late ruler, or a secret hidden from her eyes. Another disturbing mystery was the death of her magical butterflies. It seemed that an invisible force was preventing them from seeing the emperor. Leaning back in her chair exhausted, she felt a tangle of incomprehensible events becoming entangled, demanding immediate discussion. With a light snap of her slender fingers, she summoned her faithful winged messenger. In an imperious whisper, she ordered him to convey to Bibi her desire to meet. Her thoughts were filled with a determination to unravel the mysteries, eager to learn every last detail. In the luxurious chambers of Begonia's palace, deafening screams of an enraged lady could be heard. Her anger engulfed everything around, leaving no free corner. The poor maids, cowering in fear, stood meekly aside, forced to silently endure her angry tirades which rained down a hail of insults and accusations. It was hard for Olivia, whose heart had long been poisoned by a hidden grudge against the princess. She was also unbearably outraged that the emperor himself had sided with that impudent upstart. Suddenly, one of the youngest maids timidly spoke up, barely audibly breaking the oppressive silence, that the others were whispering strange rumors. It seemed as if the lady herself had carelessly fallen into the icy water of the lake. The lady turned to her with a look of anger. She sharply asked what exactly she had just said, but the frightened girl hastened to assure her of her unconditional faith in her words. However, she didn't dare completely rule out the possibility that the cunning Hilaria might have resorted to some cunning spell or trickery. Miss vividly recalled the events of that fateful day in her memory. With firm conviction, she confirmed the maid's words. She insisted that the princess had undoubtedly done something to the lake water to cunningly lure her into that icy trap. In the opinion of the concubine, her behavior was nothing more than pure witchcraft, worthy of the harshest punishment. Olivia was struck by a flash of lightning. A witch. Distant memories of when people ruthlessly hunted witches. Suddenly a thought flashed through her mind. With imperious determination, the lady ordered Fleuret to secretly send a trusted person to Guinevere, taking every precaution to ensure that her father would not suspect anything. That person's goal was to obtain irrefutable evidence at any cost, that Hilaria was a witch, the mistress of dark forces. The maid, hearing this dangerous order, became visibly alarmed. Olivia, noticing her agitation, addressed her sternly, asking if she realized the importance of their mission, to find undeniable proof of the princess's ability to control spirits. The word witch was mentioned quite often in those days. However, a few centuries ago it inspired real horror in the inhabitants of those lands. The emperor of a distant era personally declared a ruthless witch hunt, which meant that anyone could be sentenced to death on the slightest suspicion. Those terrible persecutions that unfolded before the eyes of the entire people deeply rooted in society, the seeds of distrust and prejudice against everything unusual. With the beginning of the bloody war, the frenzied witch hunt gradually subsided. It faded into the background in the face of a common threat. The empire sought to expand its possessions by annexing neighboring small states and unleashing a long and exhausting war. In that fierce struggle, the Red Queen emerged victorious. Her courage once glorified the knightly order of the empire itself. She earned universal recognition for her heroic feat. And on the ruins of her former lands, she founded a new independent state, the powerful Principality of Guinevere. With her arrival, the era of witch hunts came to an end, and the long-awaited peace finally reigned on the lands of the empire. The assistant thought that the lady was trying to lie to Princess Guinevere, which in her opinion looked dangerous. So she timidly remarked that the lady might want to change her mind because she had taken a risk. This angered Olivia, who was indignant that some maid dared to lecture her, and declared the need to expel Hilaria so that all the problems would disappear. Fleuret warned of His Majesty's possible reaction, but Olivia, confident, assured herself of her impunity thanks to the support of the Empress. She added that she could blame anyone, call the princess a witch, and forbid her from approaching the castle. The lady was undoubtedly convinced and delighted in the thought that with her removal, Eben and the entire castle would become her exclusive property. The next morning in the Emperor's eastern wing, Eben informed his faithful servant of the Empress's unexpected desire to visit their chambers. Swain's face showed genuine surprise. He could not understand what could have prompted her to make such a visit. After all, just recently she insisted that all the data presented to her was nothing more than a carefully fabricated lie. Thinking aloud, the servant suggested that the visit might be somehow connected with the new concubine, Princess Hilaria. It was rumored that she had not yet paid the Empress a proper visit, which undoubtedly could have caused her displeasure. Perhaps she intended to cause a scandal. Swain noted that, despite the princess's busy schedule, she should remember to visit. It was not her first day at the castle. The Count smiled faintly, doubting Hilaria's deliberate avoidance of the Empress, so they were glad to be able to finish the job early. Swain expressed a desire to have dinner with his family. The ruler ordered Vanika to look after his sister Charlotte. The surprised Count asked if there was anything to convey, to which Eben replied about their cold relationship with their only sister. The disgruntled husband remarked on her shortcomings and naivety, but the Emperor interrupted him. The Count apologized. The ruler assumed that Charlotte was upset about the princess. He asked her to convey his support and informed her of plans to transfer the textile factory to her. That unexpected news brought a look of surprise to Swain's face. He mustered up the courage to express his opinion. Although he understood that it might sound impudent, the servant cautiously remarked that liking several women at the same time, in his opinion, was a bad idea for an emperor. However, the lord calmly ignored his remarks and turned to Swain with a new assignment. He asked to convey to Lady Hilaria his desire to breakfast with her, explaining that it was because of her new useful orders in the castle, for which he wished to reward her. However, the Count was still worried about the lord's intention to transfer the profitable fabric business to Charlotte. He was tormented by the suspicion that this generous gesture was just another step towards strengthening Hilaria's power. So he turned to the Emperor again with a question. Wasn't everything being done with one goal in mind? To give the princess even more political weight? The ruler, beaming with joy, confirmed his guess. Swain could not contain his exclamation of delight. He realized that this could only mean one thing. The ruler was hatching plans to make the princess empress. The thought delighted him. Eben couldn't help but point out that that was why he was still with him. Full of enthusiasm, he wanted to get the princess's consent to breakfast as soon as possible. After all, then he would have much less trouble. Singing a cheerful melody, the servant almost ran towards Hilaria's castle, hurrying to fulfill his master's important assignment. Vanik noticed the great zeal and ambition of the Emperor's servant. The Emperor smiled faintly, realizing that Svein recognized the princess and desired her exaltation. He didn't want to disappoint his loyal subordinate. He mentally promised himself that he would do his best to make sure everything turned out exactly as he had imagined. Therefore, he gently asked the Count to hurry. After all, the visit of the Empress herself was expected any minute. Eben authoritatively ordered the Empress to be let in, who entered with dignity. He noted that they had not seen each other for a long time. The Empress confirmed and said she had heard of his new favorite, Hilaria, a princess from the distant principality of Guinevere. He confirmed her origin from cold lands and her physical fragility, adding that they had not yet spent the night together, and that he had barely persuaded her to have breakfast with him. Surprised by her weakness, she noted that she should be treated with understanding. The lady had arrived from the wilderness and was lingering over a visit to the oldest lady of the castle. The emperor asked her as the eldest to show leniency. The woman agreed, noting that she was to set an example, and she added that she wanted to host a tea party to get to know her new concubine. Surprised, the emperor said that Hilaria had planned a reception to meet the other concubines in preparation for him and Charlotte. He thought the empress would be invited first. He even suggested that she attend the event without an invitation. The mother's face changed. She was mentally indignant at the girl's audacity. She held back her anger and coldly remarked that the new concubine lacked experience in inviting her to such receptions. Observing her anger, the ruler assured that the princess was probably busy meeting other concubines and could not intentionally miss her. The empress replied with a faint smile that she would wait for the invitation. He thanked her and expressed confidence that she would like it, calling her lovely. However, the mother thought about the princess's resemblance to the swamp Kikimora, and an unkind light flashed in her eyes. She announced her departure. Surprised by the short visit, Eben warned her to be careful. With a displeased face, the empress left, mentally deciding to return the throne to Nelson at any cost, even if she has to sell her soul. The princess's maids informed her of the emperor's invitation to breakfast. Hilaria immediately expressed her indignation, wondering why she had been invited. When the lord had many other concubines, she was afraid of unnecessary gossip and talk. Celester tried to calm the lady, assuming that it could be a sign of sympathy on the part of His Majesty. However, the lady dismissed such an idea, considering it nonsense, behavior that was completely out of character for the emperor. She ordered Celeste to tell him that she had a stomachache and could only eat liquid food. The head maid wondered, because the situation really seemed atypical for the ruler, and it seemed that the princess was not at all interested in him. She agreed to convey Hilaria's answer to His Majesty. But suddenly the lady had an idea. She stopped Celester, wondering if this wasn't a wonderful opportunity. After some thought, Hilaria decided to go to breakfast anyway, but she asked to tell the emperor to choose another place to meet. The maid nodded obediently and quickly left. It seemed to her that her mistress was up to something, and she hoped it would not be anything dangerous. The princess smiled at Kate and assured her that it was just an innocent prank. The girl laughed. She hadn't seen her mistress so cheerful in a long time. Meanwhile, in his chambers, the ruler listened attentively to everything that was happening, all thanks to a magical butterfly imprisoned in a cage. He tapped the bars lightly, addressing the insect and praising it for its excellent work, adding that its new owner would not let it get bored. Taking advantage of the fact that all attention was focused on Hilaria, the emperor managed to take care of the Venezia family and the survivors. He attached additional butterflies to the princess, turning them into his puppets, and sent them to the palace of Sarif. With a slight smile, Eben noted that the butterfly's mistress had made his task much easier. Everything had gone smoothly, exactly as planned. However, voices came from the butterfly again. The maids who were preparing the lady's outfit and asking which one to prepare. The princess reluctantly replied that she didn't care what she had for breakfast, but Kate insisted, reminding her that she would still be having breakfast with the emperor. Hilaria assured him that she would think about it, and in general he should have been warned earlier. The choice of outfit was her full right and a personal matter. However, the maid insisted that one should not be so careless, especially when it came to preparing for His Majesty himself. It was unexpected for him. He didn't think the princess was so indifferent to him, although he had previously assumed that it was just feigned indifference. Turning to his butterfly assistant, the emperor thoughtfully asked if the insect had really told its mistress that he didn't care about her. The next morning, the servants were bustling around in the luxurious garden, where in a cozy gazebo a magnificent table was being prepared. It was literally bursting with exquisite dishes. The lord thanked the lady for accepting his invitation. Hilaria, with a faint hint of displeasure, thanked His Majesty for his kind offer. The man explained that he had been told about her desire to have breakfast in an unusual place, so he decided to arrange a meal outdoors, and he sincerely asked if everything was to her liking. All the servants stood obediently nearby, awaiting orders. The princess noticed their number, and she thanked him for fulfilling her request. The lord, smiling, thought so. Having chosen just that time, The most pleasant sunlight reigned in the garden. Hilaria sighed inwardly, feeling that she would rather faint from the watchful gazes of the servants than from the gentle rays of the sun. So she insisted that the servant should have been dismissed, but he calmly objected, asking for a little more patience. The emperor understood that it was inconvenient, but they never knew when danger might strike. Besides, he assumed that the other concubines were jealous of the princess. The lady assured them that she had always been the object of envy, even if we exclude His Majesty's special attention to her. He was surprised by this, and he asked if she was always so serious in the morning, or was it on purpose to seem nicer to him? This unexpected turn of events made Hilaria spit out her soup. She exclaimed indignantly, "Is he mocking her? And why did he say such a thing?" The princess added that she was beautiful and always beautiful. The man laughed out loud. She was indignant that it was so funny. The prince apologized because he couldn't stop. It was too sweet, he thought. The princess demanded that he stop using that word. Swain noticed how His Majesty laughed heartily. The lady, having calmed down a little, noted that she would be honest with the emperor. The necklace was enough to attract her attention, but he noted that was just the beginning. Later, others would appear, even more interested in her. The more the ruler shows interest in the princess, the more noble families will support his decision. And then the power in the empire would gradually pass into Hilaria's hands. And in the meantime, that spectacle would continue for a long time. She understood his intentions and was grateful. However, the lady did not know how to respond to such a statement. He assured her that if any difficulties arose, she should inform him, and His Majesty guaranteed that he would always be on the princess's side. She asked again, but he expressed surprise at her incredulity. Holding a glass of wine in her hand and swirling it slowly, Hilaria continued. Whenever the emperor spoke so frankly, she had to be sincere too. Hesitantly, she asked how she could repay him. Eben asked to meet with the Dowager Empress and find out why she disliked her. Staring at him with a malicious look, the lady mentally ran through the reasons for that hostility. The mere mention of the Empress made her body shudder. She saw the woman's future actions. Hilaria noticed that they were too different. A woman is ready to destroy everything in order to achieve her goal. In the bottomless depths of Infred, to overthrow the great empire, the Principality of Guinevere had to be sacrificed. The princess understood that terrible truth by looking into the original sources. The reason for the fall of such an invincible power turned out to be one person, the current empress. The mistress of the throne secretly traded fates, revealing Guinevere's secrets to her ill-wishers. Such an act is unworthy of a ruler. Only one question hung in the air from the lord. He doubted whether the lady would have done the same. However, the angry Hilaria did not understand his hint. She was indignant, wondering if she looked like such a person. The emperor, smiling faintly, found her anger amusing, comparing it to an angry kitten. Later, he made his request, inquiring how the princess felt about having a kitten. The news puzzled her. She didn't understand why he asked such a question, and whether he was joking. The ruler assured her that he had no such intention, and that he found it sweet. The very word sweetheart irritated the princess. She was indignant at why he kept repeating it when they were discussing serious matters. Although, to be honest, there was nothing to be angry with him for. He just named and named. The emperor, having stopped smiling, suggested returning to the main topic. The man fully understood her feelings for the current empress, but believed that the meeting was necessary. At the same time, he noted that he had not asked to spend the whole day with her. The princess, exhaling, agreed. After all, he was the ruler. The emperor suggested inviting Her Majesty to a future tea party. Considering that the news had not yet reached her palace, Hilaria liked the idea. Since he insisted, the lady could not refuse. His Majesty assured him that the Empress had shown considerable interest in the concubine. It seemed to him that she had finally recognized her value, and she sought to establish contact. However, then, laughing, he realized that after that conversation the princess probably would not have such a desire. Hilaria assured him that the emperor need not worry. Even all the jewels of the empire would not be enough to make her desire a mutual meeting. However, the lord insisted that she still shouldn't let her guard down. He warned that his mother was not so simple. The princess understood everything. Noticing the duke, she assumed that Vanique was probably looking for the emperor, and she cautiously asked His Majesty if he trusted him. He replied that he believed in his patriotism, but not his loyalty. Eben thought the duke could be useful. Then he was forced to leave the princess, thinking that Vanik had come with an urgent matter. The emperor rose from the table and apologized. Suddenly, Hilaria turned to the ruler again, suggesting a haircut. She was worried that her hair was falling into her husband's eyes, creating inconvenience. His Majesty was amazed by what he heard. Later, the princess rejected her own idea and asked not to pay attention, saying that it was just said that way. However, he objected, expressing his complete agreement with her. Eben thanked the lady for her concern and announced that it was time for him to go. Astonished, the girl agreed, although she did not understand his strange smile. Sometimes the emperor spoke complete nonsense. The lady wondered why she was even thinking about it. After all, Ebenezer would soon have his true love, Princess Malin of the Proiton Empire. She will arrive in Infrid as an envoy, win the heart of the ruler, and then take the place of empress. This will happen after the reform in the slums. Hilaria believed that there was nothing in herself that could interest His Majesty. She was aware of her opposite to Malin. In any case, the princess didn't want any connections, so she convinced herself that she shouldn't worry about it. It was impossible to attach a butterfly to it. The lady seemed to sense another power, but she could not use her own. The emperor could be hiding his magic. He either had the power of spirits or he knew how to block it. Both options were dangerous for her. So the princess decided to talk to Beatrice. Meanwhile, at Guinevere's palace, the woman was happy to see Hilaria's butterfly. Fortunately, everything was calm so far, and in her opinion, no problems were arising. The daughter managed to keep an eye on the emperor. The husband assured her that it couldn't have been otherwise, because she was their own daughter. The young man insisted that they must ensure her safety, even from a distance. At that moment, it was the most important task. He announced the name of Sebastian Cartal, and insisted that he be the one sent to protect Hilaria. Since he was not a native of Guinevere, he could freely visit the imperial capital, but revealing his identity would put the princess in danger. The brutal lady suggested that while he was young, he could be disguised as a girl to avoid suspicion, but Miss Selina insisted. Given what Hilaria had seen in the lair, it was not worth relying solely on the Sebastians. The woman had no idea what would happen if she sent Carl there alone. She breathed life into Carl while holding a butterfly in her hands. As she threw the insect, she heard him speak, asking if his name was Selina. Turning to Eli, she made a request. The butterfly asked what she wanted, and the lady instructed her to help the young man find Hilaria and keep an eye on him. Eli obediently accepted the order and disappeared into thin air. Then the woman confidently announced that when Carl was in symbiosis with the butterfly, they could release him from the principality. The boy's task was to go in search of Hilaria, and that butterfly would follow her will as if it were its own. Beatrice was surprised that the princess had come to the imperial castle so suddenly, and she tried to find out the reason. Hilaria assured her that she had to check and make sure. She also added that the lady knew more about magic than she did, and asked her to see if there were any traces of magic where the emperor lived. Beatrice was stunned. The emperor and magic. She remembered that they had crossed paths several times at banquets, but she had never felt any streams of magic emanating from him. He could have deliberately hidden it. After all, an empire that organized a witch hunt would not tolerate an emperor who used magic. For Hilaria, this was an interesting hypothesis, and the lady asked if the butterflies had whispered something to the princess, but the princess denied it. On the contrary, they were dying as soon as they got close to the ruler. Beatrice suspected that something was definitely wrong there, and more evidence needed to be found. If only there were some records. And besides, Duke Vanik and the faithful swain were covering for him. Hilaria thought for a moment, and then a thought struck her. Which, after all, was exactly the Duke. If her guesses were true, the man was not defending His Majesty, but the Empire. Fanika was coming towards them. Miss, recognizing him, began to move away. Meanwhile, Hilaria rushed towards him, greeting him joyfully. He also greeted the lady. It was their first meeting of this kind. It was a pleasure to meet someone like her, who was the center of attention at the time. The princess laughed coquettishly and asked him not to flatter her. After all, she herself had long wanted to meet the Duke. At that moment, Beatrice was watching them from behind a tree. Their accidental encounter, Hilaria believed, was fate. Fanik laughed at her jokes and noticed that the princess was walking in the garden with a friend. She continued her story, pressing on pity, that she had never lived in Infred before. The lady was lonely and needed support, and she looked at him with her blue eyes. Asking if the Duke would like to visit the Palace of the Steel Rose, the princess cautiously hinted at a possible agreement. The man, noticing her ocean-like eyes, agreed. He assured her that he liked certainty and asked when it would be convenient for her on a sunny or rainy day. Hilaria suggested meeting tomorrow. He replied that the next day was his only day off, so he would be absent from work. Beatrice whispered to the butterfly that they would be selling weapons the next day, and she thought that Mr. Clarinet would be interested. The insect told Hilaria what Bibi had said, and exclaimed that it was such a pity. She had heard that some wonderful gunpowder had recently arrived, and she thought the Duke would like to go to the market to buy some for himself. The man listened in surprise, not understanding what the lady meant. The princess assured her that she knew about their preparations for the hunting competition. She clarified that she might have confused something. After all, the raccoon will soon be released from exile, and I thought it would be nice to hunt him together. However, looking at the lady, Vanique reported with displeasure that she said dangerous things and that she walked on the edge. Hilaria remarked that she might be mistaken, but that was no reason for rudeness. The Duke only laughed, understanding why she had taken such a liking to His Majesty. The princess suddenly expressed a desire for Vanique to accompany her, holding her hand. However, she was embarrassed by her own frankness. She quickly corrected herself, explaining that she had not spoken correctly. Hilaria did not seek negotiations, she was just allowing herself to be honest. The whole question was whether they would cooperate or whether she would go against him. Then she reported the information, something that could hurt a man to the core, like information about Charlotte and Olivia. So her request for a meeting tomorrow was not something she could refuse. The lady only wanted to convey that her presence would be more useful to him than to her. The man suddenly understood what she meant and agreed. The princess was pleased, and there they ended their conversation. She expected to see him the next day at the agreed place. Vanique asked if the emperor would allow her, but the lady assured him that he shouldn't worry about it, since the emperor himself wanted it. Bowing to the princess, the Duke announced that they would meet the next day at 11 o'clock in the morning. Hilaria smiled contentedly and said goodbye until tomorrow. Then together with Beatrice she headed for the palace. The Duke watched after them. After meeting with the princess, he found himself in the emperor's office. His Majesty asked how their meeting with Hilaria had gone. The man reported that the lady claimed that the sovereign himself wished for their meeting. The emperor thoughtfully replied that it was so. In his opinion, the conversation was successful, and he asked what exactly was discussed. The Duke replied that Hilaria invited him to the palace of the Steel Rose. The lord was surprised by this, and with a nervous smile he asked if Vanique agreed. But he denied that he had even thought about it, and they agreed to meet outside the palace. Looking at the papers, His Majesty thought, since they were to meet the next day. He remembered that the princess would be leaving the palace grounds for the first time, and asked his husband to look after her. Vanique was surprised why the ruler addressed him as you. He assured them that he would do everything possible, but he didn't understand why the emperor didn't ask where they were going, since the next day was a day off. The lord assumed that they would go to see the play, and warned them to be more careful. After all, by then all eyes would be on her. The Duke bowed and assured him that he would take care of Hilaria. Eben was very grateful, since he personally gave his blessing and did not want bad rumors to spread. Vanique noticed His Majesty's anger. Bowing, he paid homage and assured him of his submission. Just as he was about to leave, the emperor suddenly exclaimed that he had been looking forward to his meeting with Charlotte. In his opinion, they had much to talk about. The Duke was surprised and assured. It seemed that even more inconveniences awaited him that day than usual. His Majesty silently looked after Vanique, and it seemed to him that fate had caught up with him earlier than he expected. On their way back to the palace, the princess and the lady listened to the butterflies. They brought back to them the whispers of everyone in the palace about Hilaria's popularity, her beauty, and the interest of a lady of the Guinevere family. Holding a butterfly on her hand, the princess noticed that it seemed as if everyone was talking only about her. This had started since she arrived. Beatrice found it strange that it bothered her. After all, she was talked about even outside the palace. When she reached the gazebo, the lady indicated that she had breakfasted there with the emperor. Miss, taking a leaf from the bush, was surprised to find it frozen, as if it were winter outside. She asked Hilaria to share the light. The leaf was engulfed in flames. However, her friend noticed that it had not thawed. Looking back, Beatrice confirmed Hill's words. There were traces of magic on the emperor's place. She wondered who he was, if not human. The princess confidently declared that he was a demon. With so much magical energy, she said, there was a high probability that he had something from the spirit world. Otherwise, her butterflies wouldn't die when they got close to him. But she couldn't understand how a demon had taken on human form. The lady believed that the Lord was still human but possessed by a demon. Hilaria realized that this also explained why her magic had not worked on him. Then, looking at the palace, she saw Ebenezer in the window. On his jacket, a cold blue rose sparkled as if made of ice. If the ruler knew from the very beginning that she used the power of spirits, it meant that he was also aware of Guinevere's secret principalities. He knew about the Red Queen Tatiana Guinevere, who put an end to the witch hunt, and about the true reason for the founding of the Principality of Spirits, into which witches had turned after death. The secret they had kept hidden for 300 years now depended on him. No matter how strong the guards were, the spirits had no guarantee that the witch hunt wouldn't start again. Looking at His Majesty with her yellow eyes, she thought, maybe she would just have to kill Ebenezer. The Emperor also looked at the princess without looking up, and through the butterflies he sent her a message, offering to make a deal. The princess was surprised that it was her butterfly, and she responded to his offer by asking what kind of deal it was. He declared that they would exchange secrets with her. The Emperor explained that he was born of a spirit and a human, so her butterflies could not get along with him. Holding one of them on his arm, he asked, what had the princess decided without taking her cold gaze and hidden smile away? The fact that the Lord could control her butterflies surprised her, so the lady asked if he had decided to use it as a threat. His Majesty looked at her and asked her not to look at him like that. Then he asked if she was interested, shrugging her shoulders and shaking her head. He called her cute. The princess didn't like that, and she sent her message, saying that she wasn't like that at all. In Hilaria's chambers, a lavishly laid table of sweets awaited her, and the entire room was decorated with flowers. She was shaking bright red pebbles out of a bag. Kate announced that she had brought the princess's favorite sweets, assuring her that they were all for her, and told the disgruntled lady to enjoy them to the fullest. Hilaria, holding her head, kept thinking that something was still wrong with her head. The girl wondered what it was. And the princess suddenly burst into a scream, expressing her irritation. The fact that the prince constantly called her cute, and that annoyed her every time. The silent assistant stood nearby, thoughtful. Kate wondered why the lady disliked the Emperor so much, and Celeste mentally suggested that perhaps His Majesty was doomed to suffer because of unrequited love. Beatrice burst into a loud laugh. She couldn't believe the Emperor had really said that to her. In her opinion, the princess seemed nice to him. Miss couldn't understand why she was so worried, and she assured her that Hilaria should have faced the truth. They could not defeat the Emperor, but that did not mean that they were completely powerless. The princess asked if this was true, and Beatrice confirmed it. There was hope that by learning the name of the spirit, a deal could be struck. Hilaria doubted this, while Beatrice did not rule out such a possibility. The princess agreed and asked Bibi if they could research the lineage of the higher spirits. She smiled and promised to do her best. The Duke appeared at the Canary Castle where Charlotte was sitting. Vanique asked what she was so fascinated by looking at the papers. The concubine said she was busy, and if he wanted to pick on her, he had better leave. She thought for a moment. Why was she invited to tea so suddenly? And she smiled ironically, wondering how to prepare for it. Vanique came over and sat down next to her, noting in his mind that his sister seemed to be hiding something. The blonde asked what he wanted to talk about. The Duke announced that he had a message from His Majesty. The girl happily asked if he had invited her to breakfast or perhaps to dinner. He announced that work was underway on slum reforms. The plan was to build a new type of mansion that could accommodate several generations. They wanted to build those houses in poverty. Employment of the local population was a key point. However, the dissatisfied Charlotte did not understand what the point was. The husband informed her that the Emperor had entrusted the matter to her. She asked sadly if he really had reason to rely on her, since he had Hilaria. The Duke began to explain the reason to his sister. Since Charlotte helped the princess, the ruler was very pleased. After all, this was how some palace affairs were settled. Vanique, with a slight smile, hoped that the lady would agree to cooperate with Hilaria, and would again agree to help her. Staring at him, Charlotte asked, did that mean she should hand over her duties to the princess? However, her husband emphasized that she shouldn't take on things she couldn't handle. If she wanted to continue living that life, then she shouldn't be stingy. Therefore, the lady had to come up with a way to gain the Emperor's trust. He believed that helping Hilaria was the best solution in the absence of another plan. And what she couldn't handle, Hilaria would do for her. The Duke stood up and, leaning forward, declared that she had virtually no chance of attracting the Emperor's attention. Therefore, he advised his sister to retain at least the privileges she had. Van Eyck made it clear that she was connected to the ruler only by political matters, and he advised her not to try to become empress. She could think for a moment about what a mistake he had made by siding with the widowed empress. The man warned his sister not to do anything stupid, because at that moment her life was at stake, and he asked the girl to be careful. Charlotte began to tremble as she listened, and tears welled up in her eyes. He reminded her not to forget that there were many concubines, and Ebenezer could be taken from her. Then the Duke stood up and announced that he was leaving. As soon as he turned around, the blonde aimed a vessel at him, but he dodged. She was very angry. Hilaria had received a gift from His Majesty. She sat in her chambers, examining a card on which something was written. The owner congratulated her on her first appearance in the world, and hoped that good shoes would take her to good places. She was interested in the phrase about good places. She pondered the significance of the case. Was it related to Duke Clarinet's arms trade or to his collaboration with Ebenezer? The princess was amazed at how much he knew. And how could there be so much darkness in a being born of spirits? She called for Celeste and ordered the clothes and jewelry to be prepared to match the shoes. The assistant obeyed, rejoicing that the two would finally be reunited. It seemed to the lady that only the head maid was happy about it. The girl, with pleasure, quickly ran to prepare everything. Then Hilaria noticed that the shoes were gold again, just like the jewelry he had sent her last time. She could not understand how His Majesty knew of her tastes, but they were beautiful. However, the lady did not know whether she liked it. Snapping her fingers, a light flashed inside her and a butterfly appeared. She realized that the ruler must have decided to prove his power in this way, but she didn't understand because this couldn't be. Hilaria couldn't believe that the Emperor owned her butterflies. Kate arrived unexpectedly and announced the arrival of Lady Beatrice. The princess was about to visit the Duke of Clarinet's house together. Meanwhile, in the darkness of the night, a chariot with 2 men was riding. One of them was a young man sent from Guinevere's palace. The man asked about his origins, and the boy replied that he was from the Principality of Guinevere. The coachman noted that everyone from there was tall and strong, so the young man must have had his share of trouble in life. Cartal assumed that the man had often encountered people like him. The charioteer asked if he was a knight, and he added that permission was required to leave the principality. The boy took up the sword and explained that he was not yet proficient with it and was only learning, not being a knight. The man then understood why the man was able to leave so easily. He must have had a very important meeting coming up. The young man said that he was going to Lady Gina because his brother had asked him to. It was an honor for the coachman to travel to the Marquis's residence. He was also going that way, so he would get him almost to where he needed to go. Cartal sincerely thanked him for the help. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were shining turquoise. In his mind, the young man clearly felt Gina, Beatrice, and Hilaria, the very ones he was called to protect. A carriage rolled up to the entrance, and they were met by the smiling Duke, warmly greeting Hilaria and Miss Beatrice. The ladies were elegantly dressed, peering out of the carriage. They were smiling and also happy to meet. The host, with sincere hospitality, invited them to the residence of the Clarinet family. As the princess and Beatrice rode in a carriage, approaching the palace, the meeting place, Hilaria noticed a guard. Then she remembered and turned to Bibi, asking if she knew anything about Gina. Miss seemed to think she was a distant relative of the Empress. The princess was surprised by such a distant relationship, but it didn't matter. It seemed that Gina was good with a sword. Miss was surprised by this. She knew that Count Romanov had 5 sons, and they were all knights. It was no wonder that even the youngest daughter was skilled at it. But even if she wanted to become a knight, she wouldn't be allowed to. Looking at her, Hilaria thought for a moment. Beatrice also rarely saw Jenna at social events, so she knew little about her. Despite everything, she received only positive feedback, claiming that everyone knew her as a kind and gentle lady. The princess wondered again who could have decided such a thing. Miss watched her with concern, suspecting another plot. But the princess assured her that she had nothing bad in mind. The Romanov family, or rather its lineage, opposed the Gottlieb Empire and the Hermes Empire. They also had a large naval army to defend themselves. The family was second only to the House of Guinevere in influence. But from now on, the lady was no longer a Romanov. She became a Gina. The princess instructed Bibi to prepare a gift that would impress the concubine, perhaps a sword with a glorious history. As soon as they arrived at the meeting place, they were met by the Duke, who shook hands with Hilaria, announcing her arrival. She assured them that she had to make connections. Suddenly, the lady heard a female voice, looked up and saw Charlotte, who was displeasedly asking about the princess's presence. Then she saw Vaneko's look and remembered their conversation the previous evening. He had warned her sister not to do anything stupid. With a smile, the princess turned to the concubine, who had also decided to take a walk that day, expressing her joy at meeting her in an informal setting. Charlotte listened in silence, then said that she was also glad to meet him. She had been informed of the arrival of her acquaintance, but she had no idea that it was the princess. Hilaria noticed the good coincidence and asked the lady's opinion. After all, the day promised to be good. But behind her smile there was discontent. It was all Ebenezer's fault. He probably didn't want her to talk to Vanique alone. Of course he had to know, which is why he sent Charlotte. The Duke suggested a change of venue and prepared a carriage. The princess agreed, regretting not having shown him her magnificent palace. She invited him to visit the Palace of the Steel Rose next time. She also added that it seemed that His Majesty was aware of their outing. And she noted that he was also involved in the crime. The man was embarrassed and silent, not knowing what to say. And the lady smiled sweetly. Vanique suggested they move to the carriage. They sat opposite each other, and he drew attention to the new shoes the Emperor had given her. It seemed to him that he cared for her more than he thought. However, the princess denied everything and was a little embarrassed, not wanting him to think so. The man wanted to say directly that the ruler was preparing for war at that time, and the Duke offered himself to him as his right hand. Hilaria was surprised by the news of the upcoming war. Vanique reported that the plan had been brewing for a long time and remained unchanged, open to buying weapons, recruiting knights. He was suddenly interrupted by the princess, who warned him to be more careful. She noted that the situation was different from the Guinevere War during the conflict with the Zacharians. The Duke fully agreed with her. After all, their empire had lost Shariv and Asphalt during the war 200 years ago. They and His Majesty had the same opinion. Victory required not only supplies of weapons, equipment, and food. They also prepared a subtle psychological attack, because war was not without casualties. With her head bowed, Hilaria reported that there was a high probability of neighboring countries attacking Infred, and that they could not allow that to happen. In the future, she saw, Guinevere was sacrificed in that war. But the lady was not to allow such a development of events. She announced that she understood her key role in that war, based on Vanique's words. After all, she was there to change the future. The Duke assured that he was only an assistant to the Emperor and did not know his true intentions. His only desire was the prosperity and glory of the family and the empire. Instead, the man asked about the princess's wishes. She wanted peace and security for the Principality of Guinevere and for the Empire of Infred. After all, that's what she was there for. The man noticed that they had a common interest, and mentally he wished that the conversation would continue and longed for another meeting. Vanique asked if he could come to the palace at any time. The princess, of course, assured him of that. The lady remarked that he shouldn't consider her an unconditional supporter of the Infred Empire. She didn't take sides. The Duke was amazed by what he heard. The man listened carefully and assured her that everything would be as the princess wished. Hilaria had no doubt that war was inevitable, but she was worried about the consequences for Count Narton's family. That thought gave her no peace. If he obeyed the Emperor's orders without question, everything would be easy. However, if he didn't, she would force him to submit to her will. The princess saw a poor slum outside the window, where poverty reigned. She looked at the Duke and asked if he was going to leave her there alone, but he assured her that this was nonsense. After all, the Emperor would never allow such a thing. He had entrusted Charlotte with the reform of the slums, so it might have seemed to the princess that they had come there to help her. However, Vanique had simply chosen a less suspicious place to meet. In Hilaria's vision of the future, those reforms were handled by Gina. She questioned whether Charlotte had really been entrusted with everything. The Duke confirmed. She was the first person the Emperor had entrusted with such an important task. He sincerely believed that the princess would also help them. Hilaria involuntarily thought that it might help, and it was worth a try. So she assured the Duke that she would not take the request lightly. The princess remembered her mother saying that there were many poor people, and the government was to blame for their poverty. All the misery and hunger were also the fault of the country's leadership. Therefore, the woman assured her that despite her high status, she should not forget to see what was happening around her. Everyone was against the marriage because they were worried about her. The mother hoped that the situation would not upset her daughter, and she assured them that everyone believed in her and loved her. Those words were deeply etched in her memory, that the government was to blame for people's poverty. Hilaria spoke, remembering her mother's advice. The woman wished the princess to see her people. The duke listened silently and did not take his eyes off her. Then the lady turned her gaze to him, and flirtatiously with a laugh, she asked him not to fall in love with her. After all, she was His Majesty's bride. Vanik, with a blush on his cheeks and a green gaze, assured her that the lady had said dangerous things, and in passing he tidied up his hair in embarrassment. When their carriage reached its destination, the princess and duke alighted. Charlotte and Beatrice also arrived. The duke announced that this was where they would part ways. He suggested that his sister look around with Beatrice. Charlotte agreed without objection. The princess seemed to have calmed down. Although the miss noted that they did not talk at all, the princess thought that perhaps the concubine had simply changed her mind. Then she announced that they would meet later, warning the young ladies to be careful, and for Bibi to take care of Lady Charlotte. They parted ways and the girls wished them a pleasant walk. The princess walked confidently in her new shoes, a gift from the emperor. They approached a large, shabby-looking building, and Vanik said it was the exact place he was talking about. The lady smelled alcohol, which made her think of a hospital. She released the butterfly. Approaching the door, the duke announced that they were going there. Once inside, the man continued his story. After the war that took place 200 years ago, a real ghetto was formed there. Rumors circulated among the people about terrible events that took place in that very place. For the upset princess, this was terrible, because they seemed to live in a progressive era. That is why, according to Vaneko, the ruler wanted to initiate reforms. He wanted to revive the place, to restore it to the way it had been before the war. Hilaria looked around silently. Ebenezer's plan will be crowned with success. Thanks to his reforms, he will gain the support of the people. New houses, built in slums, will appear throughout the state. After the reforms, Malin Preußen will appear in the empire, around whom rumors have been circulating, in particular that she has arrived to marry Ebenezer. The girl was like a flower, beautiful, pure, and intelligent, whom everyone wanted to protect unconditionally. She was also warmly welcomed by the people. Malin sincerely cared for the prosperity of the empire. She was the only girl who received all of His Majesty's love. Looking into the broken mirror, Hilaria thought that she was not at all like herself. So the whole thing made the lady feel terrible. She followed the duke, and the man informed her that they needed to go through an underground passage, warning the princess to be careful. The lady was constantly thinking about Ebenezer and Malin. She had no intention of interfering in their relationship, but one thought would not leave her, that they could live a happy life. When Guinevere's native principality was threatened by disaster. Upon returning, Vanik inquired about the princess's well-being. Hilaria, thoughtful, replied that everything was fine, explaining that she had never visited such places before. As she descended the steep stairs, she jokingly asked if Vanik was going to conduct weapons operations right there. However, he said that this place was only for auctions, and the weapons were usually delivered a week later. The princess became interested, considering the possibility of participating in or even winning the auction. However, the duke objected, explaining that it was impossible. He emphasized that the ladies must understand the importance of being unnoticed. Otherwise, they will have to suffer a lot for the good of the empire. She assured him that he could be relied on, because he was loyal to his empire. It was those qualities that attracted the princess. However, her husband asked her not to say such words. An upset Hilaria expressed her dissatisfaction that the duke took the jokes too seriously. In the lady's opinion, there was nothing wrong with that. It was the first time the man had heard such a thing, but Hilaria believed that everyone judged only by their own feelings. She asked to hurry up so she could get back to the tent. She remembered the dinner with the lord. He must have put that letter in the shoebox on purpose. It was to be their first dinner, and she knew that Celeste was probably preparing a bath, anxiously awaiting her return. Therefore, the duke assured that they must hurry. But the princess, to be honest, wanted to continue the conversation. Vanik seemed to her a charming man. Of course, the emperor couldn't lose him. Approaching the open door, they saw a man in a mask. He stretched out his hand, blocking the entrance, and asked for the password. The Duke declared, "Luck will come to him who has tied himself a clover that blooms at the edge of the forest." Then the man asked for a secret number. Vanik said 12. After that, they were let in. The door immediately closed behind them. The Duke explained that they were the last ones and it was a good thing they weren't late. He really wanted to be in time for the start. Hilaria noticed that there were about 15 people in the room, and the identity of each remained unknown. Having released the butterfly, she knew that it was Count Narton who had organized the auction. And without a doubt, he must have been aware of all its participants. Carefully attaching the butterfly to the presenter, the lady finally heard the solemn announcement of the beginning, and announced that we could finally enjoy the bidding. The Lord was sitting in his office when there was a knock on his door. He invited them in and asked what had happened. Lady Olivia appeared before him with a slight smile on her lips. Coming closer, she expressed a desire to speak. The Emperor was the first to make his request. He wished to purchase a gift for the Empress. Lady Olivia was aware, having been told everything on the way to him. She gazed at the ruler with admiration, considering him the most handsome man in the empire. And the depth of jealousy could only be understood by being in her shoes. His Majesty asked the lady to go and pay her respects to the Empress. She obeyed. The man asked her to return the next evening. Otherwise, His Majesty would be worried and unable to sleep. But frankly, if she were to return, it wouldn't upset him too much. Instead, her absence could be a pretext for the destruction of Count Erasmus's family. Olivia assured him that she would do nothing to worry the ruler. She seemed naive to him. If she had been in her place, Hilaria would have been able to discern the hidden meaning. But Olivia was not so perceptive. He assumed that the princess must have had fun on her walk. The man was counting on his concubine and asked her to leave. The girl, however, hurried to ask if they could have dinner together the next day after she returned. The Emperor did not think that was possible, as he had many things to do. She tried to suggest another day, but the Emperor objected. What Olivia must understand is that there had to be something special about her for him to want to spend the evening with her. But he didn't see that unique highlight in her. His words stunned the lady and she trembled, wondering if it was all because of Hilaria. Turning sharply, she announced that she was leaving. He felt irritated as he looked at her. Then he noticed a letter from Hilaria among the papers. She asked him not to come, as she would come to the palace herself. His Majesty was intrigued by this. It seemed that the princess was planning to bring another man to her palace. As Hilaria and Vanika returned, the sun had set. The ladies were waiting for them by the carriage, calling out to them. As they approached, they were immediately asked about the course of events and whether everything had gone well. The princess assured them that the evening had been wonderful, and she would have regretted it if she had not gone with the Duke. Anxious, Beatrice asked to wait, wanting to know all the details. However, Hilaria instead turned to Vaneko, sincerely expressing her gratitude for the pleasant time spent. She invited him to visit next time, assuring him that she would always be glad to see him. She thought that she and Miss would be the first to go to the palace. The princess announced that she would very much like to stay and dine with the Duke, but she had plans for the evening with His Majesty. At that moment, her eyes shone with two shades, blue and yellow. The princess also thanked Charlotte for the invitation. The concubine replied without enthusiasm that she was also glad. She wished them a safe journey, then fell silent, and then said that they would see each other again. The carriage moved. Bibi, puzzled, looked out the windows. She did not notice anyone on the street and quickly handed the magic crystals to the princess. Hilaria was surprised. Miss got angry, asking why they went to the auction, and warned that the lady did not notice how her eyes changed color. The lady was confused. Beatrice, trembling, handed her the crystals and was only glad that Vanik had not noticed. Otherwise, the witch hunt would have begun again. She warned that the princess could not be so careless. But Hilaria reassured her, saying that everything would be fine. However, her friend was very worried about Hill. In the past, the witch hunt began with people conspiring against the Guinevere family. They feared and envied their magical abilities. The family and the red-haired queen were isolated. But that wasn't enough to finally stop the witch hunt. Infrid supported Guinevere in every way as an apology, thanks to which the latter managed to escape and hide their abilities. The descendants of the red-haired queen were able to start a new life. Instead of personal feelings, the queen always chose peace and prosperity. After all, the prosperity of the Guinevere family was the highest value for her. Hilaria thought about the fact that Guinevere's blood flowed in her veins. She shed tears as she remembered what she had seen. when everything around her was burning. That brief memory of the past and future confirmed her knowledge. The queen had always longed for peace, but it seemed that only she had such a desire. Looking out the carriage window, Beatrice assured them that they would arrive soon. Noticing the ring with a butterfly in the princess's hands, she exclaimed loudly that it was not worth wasting strength on such a trifle. Miss was very angry, reproaching the princess for her inability to restrain herself, and asked her to stop. But Hilaria assured him that everything was fine. She explained that she had taken the butterfly to the auctioneer and they could have exposed him. Bewildered, Bibi assured her that she would tell her everything when she found out something. Then she asked the lady to stop. The princess smiled calmly and asked the miss not to push herself, honestly promising to follow her advice. Swain informed His Majesty that Lady Hilaria had arrived. The emperor, anxious, asked if everything was ready for dinner. The aide assured him that it was. The man had something else for the king. He whispered that it was a perfume that would help seduce the princess, and asked him to believe him. After all, Baron Erdogan, the father of 5 children, used this fragrance. Moreover, it was not easy to find such a bottle. Ebenezer turned away and asked Swain if he really thought he needed something like that. But the annoying assistant had no idea. He was concerned that people's tastes were changing so quickly. He thought the emperor should have known sooner rather than later whether Hilaria was right for him. The lord looked a little irritated. Then he smiled, assuring them that they were just going to eat. Swain wondered why he had taken dinner so seriously. In the castle of the Steel Rose, Celeste invited her mistress to the bathtub, which was filled with water and generously sprinkled with rose petals. Hilaria immediately realized that the maid was in her usual style. She had also added rose oil. Celeste bought it herself and was sure that the emperor would appreciate it. The princess was sincerely grateful for such care. As Hilaria sank into the warm bath, she thought about meeting Ebenezer. She was confused by his personality and had no idea who he really was. Instead, the lord seemed to know all the lady's secrets, and that caused concern. So she desperately needed to know something that no one else knew. For example, about his connection with spirits. The princess needed information that could become a weapon against him. At the mirror, Celeste announced that she was finished with her preparations. Looking at herself, Hilaria studied her reflection carefully, and she said they were just going to have dinner, worried if they were trying too hard. The lady looked very elegant. Kate insisted that His Majesty was so handsome, and she should be even more beautiful, because she was their pride and honor. Both maids were of the same opinion. The princess respected her dear Kate, and assured her not to worry because she was always beautiful. The arrival of the lady was announced at the lord's castle. He was waiting for her at the table and greeted the princess warmly. Looking at him, Hilaria felt something strange. She arrived on time, but for some reason the emperor was not in a good mood. He pointed out that this was her first activity in the empire, and asked how the trip had gone. The princess seriously assured that everything happened the same as in Guinevere, explaining everything by the historical connection of the kingdom with the Infred Empire. The emperor inquired whether she had been with Lady Beatrice and Charlotte. She could not understand why he had not mentioned the Duke, and she said that Duke Venike was with them, and thanks to him she had spent her time profitably. Ebenezer, laughing, asked if she had obeyed him. It seemed to him that they had become closer, but the lady denied it, not quite. However, there was good relations between them, and she remained silent. Quite unexpectedly, the lord asked her to stay with him for the night. Hilaria was drinking water when she coughed at what she heard, asking what he had said. The man explained that he didn't let anyone into his bed, but he made an exception for her, since she wouldn't even let him cross the threshold of the Rose of the Valley. So he asked her to stay with him. The lady was confused for a moment and remained silent, mentally reproaching herself for her foolishness. A real scandal will arise when the Duke arrives at the palace of the Steel Rose. She would not even let the emperor himself in. In that case, people might think that their relationship was no different from their relationship with other concubines. The princess sought a strong partnership. Therefore, she had to become someone who would not pose a threat to the widowed empress. Recovering, Hilaria apologized to His Majesty, noting that it was her mistake, and she could not even imagine that she would upset him so much. The lady had completely forgotten that the traditions there were different from her family's. He thought she was talking about something that would upset him, but it annoyed him. Hilaria was hanging out with someone else, and Vanique had not filed a report, and even the maids were silent. And then he suddenly sighed and became a little sad. However, the lady informed His Majesty that she would remain in his castle that day. Her attendants were stunned by this statement. She smiled sweetly at him and added that, of course, she would sleep in his bedroom. The lord was quite surprised by this. The princess also noticed his fatigue and advised him to go to bed earlier. Ebenezer, covering his face, turned red. To him, the lady was so unpredictable yet so charming. He couldn't understand if she really didn't know anything. Hilaria asked for a change of clothes as she had not brought any, but the emperor assured her that something would be found for her in the palace. Looking at him and smiling, the princess noticed that his mood had improved. She agreed and announced that she would look forward to that night. Late in the evening, the corridors of Canary Castle were filled with whispers of maids discussing the princess and her intention to remain in the imperial palace. Charlotte, standing at the door of her room, overheard snippets of their conversation. What she heard struck her as surprising, as if Hilaria had indeed remained in the lord's castle. Until late at night, the fair-haired lady stood by the window watching the rain. Her mind was filled with the words of the maids that the princess had remained in his bedroom. She never thought she would be so affected. When the senior assistant approached her, Charlotte continued to convince herself that this was the first time this had happened. But no, she was trembling all over, and a forbidden thought flashed through her mind. If the lady were in Hilaria's place. But she immediately cut herself off, plunging into silence. The maid asked anxiously if the lady was all right, but there was no answer. Charlotte thought she was fed up with everything. She was tired of criticizing the princess and being jealous, which made her feel unhappy. If she herself could not take the place of empress that she had dreamed of so much, she suggested that Hilaria should take the throne. She firmly decided to make her empress, because she was more suitable for the role, and the concubine turned to Jura, and firmly ordered to throw away all cosmetics with a red tint and all clothes of the same color. She no longer wanted to wear something that didn't suit her, just to attract the emperor's attention, not wanting to indulge his tastes. Defiantly wiping the red lipstick from her lips, Charlotte made a firm decision. From that moment on, she would only wear what she liked. Also, with a sense of relief, the blonde ordered the outfit she had worn before arriving at the castle to be prepared for her. She decided it was time to move on. Entering the bedroom, Hilaria noticed a table with wine and cheese, and in the middle of the large red room was a bed with snow-white bedding. Sitting down on the sofa, she asked His Majesty, "Isn't that all?" Coming up to her, he repeated what he had said, how much he loved red, especially her color. The princess asked with a smile if he meant her hair. Eben confirmed that not only his, but also the lady's blue eyes and even Guinevere's. He loved it all. Hilaria was surprised, finding it inappropriate and strange. Why would he say such a thing at that time? It seemed as if the ruler was trying to distract her attention. Taking the bottle in his hands, the emperor reported that the wine fully reveals its taste when chilled. In his hands, it immediately began to feel cold. After all, the wine was made specifically for cold regions. Uncorking the bottle, he poured it into the princess's glass. Taking it, Hilaria looked carefully, sniffed, and felt the energy of the ice. She thanked him and raised the glass to her lips. Ebenezer silently stared at her. After tasting it, the princess remarked that the wine was quite delicious and the aroma was refreshing. It was the first time she had ever drunk anything like it. The man smiled contentedly, glad she liked it. The lady asked for another glass. His Majesty did not refuse but warned her not to overdo it. The princess promised not to let him see her in an animal state. It seemed to her that never before had wine drunk so quickly and sweetly. After the second glass, Hilaria, smiling, extended her hand, asking for more. The emperor added without hesitation, with involuntary tenderness, mentally noting how sweet it was. Perhaps it was all in the atmosphere of the room. There was a calmness and tranquility there that was more relaxing than the drink itself. The lady drank much more than she realized, and when she was finally drunk, she asked for some more. But this time His Majesty gently refused, saying that was enough. The princess smiled a little tiredly and quietly remarked that she wanted to rest. Rising from the couch, she took a step, and suddenly staggered. The lord hurried to her, but before he had time, Hilaria was on the floor. He bent down anxiously and asked if everything was okay. She rubbed her eyes and asked for help in a weak voice, for she had no strength left. Ebenezer offered her his hand, and then, without waiting for her to sway again, he picked her up in his arms. Before he had even reached the bed, the princess had fallen into a deep sleep. Carefully placing her on the bed, he sat down next to her. watching her in silence. Hilaria slept, and the man whispered to himself how strange she was. But just as Ebenezer was about to get up, the princess, as if sensing his movement, grabbed his shirt and mumbled sleepily that she was not strange, but beautiful. Still half asleep, she turned to him and added what her mother always said: "Hilaria is the most beautiful in the whole world." The emperor looked back at her. The lady reached out and whispered, wanting him to say the words. Eben was silent, but finally he said that she was beautiful. Smiling, the princess repeated that she was not strange. She held out her hand to him and he took it, gripping her wrist tightly. The lord replied that it was so, and that there was something magical in that strangeness. He lay down over her, adding with a smile that he would allow himself a little madness. The princess glanced at him awkwardly, her cheeks flushed with a delicate blush. The emperor smiled and said in a gentle voice that at such a moment she looked even more beautiful, although it seemed that it could not be better. He got up and sat down next to her, but the lady did not let him go. Hilaria whispered that she liked it and promised to show him all her beauty. His Majesty looked at her in surprise. She hugged him tightly, and then she was on top of him, leaning so close that she could hear his every breath. Outside the window, the rain was softly falling, making silver marks on the glass. The lady was gently running her fingers through his black hair, whispering something warm and playful about his beauty. The emperor responded with silent caresses, running his hand through her soft hair, assuring her that she was still the most beautiful woman in the world. Hilaria smiled and, agreeing, slowly leaned in, giving His Majesty a kiss as gentle as a ray of sunshine. It was raining outside. Olivia sat in Begonia Castle reading a message with trembling hands, so Hilaria decided to spend the night in the emperor's bedroom. She crumpled up the message and turned to her father, asking if he remembered her request to learn about witches. The man placed the folder on her desk, telling her that was all he had found. Silently looking at the stack of papers, the girl thought that wasn't enough. She needed information that could destroy the princess, so it wouldn't work out that way. She needed something that would help manipulate that girl. The worried mother turned to Olivia. She said with a nervous smile that there had simply been unexpected news from the castle, and the daughter assured her that she would figure everything out herself, asking her mother not to attach any importance to it. The woman, as always, relied on her, but she warned her not to forget to preserve the honor and dignity of the family. The mother hoped that the ruler would one day recognize both her and their family. Olivia agreed with her mother, and the words about the dignity of the family touched her. In that case, the princess would take everything from her, even Ebenezer. Most records of the witch hunts were destroyed by the imperial family, making it extremely dangerous to search for any remains. But the concubine understood that this was the only way she could prove that Hilaria was a witch, and she was determined to do it. Through her hazy state, the princess heard Kate's voice trying to wake her up. The alarmed lady woke up, clutching her head, which ached terribly. The girl asked if she was okay and rushed to hug her. Hilaria didn't understand what had happened or why she was asking such questions. She felt that something was wrong. Kate, tearfully, reported that her mistress seemed to have had too much to drink the previous evening, and she tried to find out how she was feeling, whether she was nauseous. The princess assured her that everything was fine and not to worry. But unfortunately, she didn't remember anything, and that was very bad. Her butterflies could not even approach Ebenezer's room. The lord's assistant entered the chambers with his message. She asked Hilaria if she would like to have breakfast with His Majesty. She couldn't help but think about what he had said about breakfast, trying to remember what really happened last night, and the lady politely refused because she wanted to go back to the palace and take a bath. However, the maid informed her that the emperor had ordered her not to rush. The bath was ready, and Celester would bring her a change of clothes. When Hilaria got up, she decided to take a bath first, noticing how well everything had been thought out. On the way, she asked Kate about her plans for the day. The assistant announced that after breakfast with the emperor, it would be necessary to send out invitations to a tea party. Confused, the lady remembered the invitation to the Dowager Empress. Afterwards, a dinner with Lady Charlotte and financial advisors awaited her. Hilaria was shocked by the meeting with the concubine and the treasurers, but Kate reported that the lady herself had said so the previous evening. Closing her eyes, she recalled what had been said. The princess decided to rely on more than just Charlotte. It seemed humiliating. Exhausted, the lady exhaled heavily, mentally berating herself for her own foolishness. Her grace and pride seemed to have vanished without a trace. She chided herself for her stupidity and loss of dignity. Kate asked anxiously if everything was okay, and the princess replied with a smile that everything would be fine. Then fragments of the previous evening began to surface in her mind. Ebenezer. First she moved closer to him. Their faces were very close. Then there was a hug and, most importantly, a kiss. The stunned princess did not understand what she had done. Sitting in the bathtub, she covered her face, mentally calling herself a fool who had gone completely crazy. Lady remembered exactly that she had started it all, and she didn't want to think about it. Perhaps it was for the best that her butterflies couldn't get near him. Alarmed, Kate tried to find out what was happening to the princess, but she, calming herself, repeated that there was no reason to worry. The assistant was confused, not understanding what the lady was talking about. Hilaria smiled back and assured her that nothing had happened. As she plunged into the bath, the lady reflected that the more she talked to Ebenezer, the stranger things became. She dove headlong into the water. Meanwhile, Ebenezer was working in his office. Looking at his hand, he remembered playing with the princess's hair, and smiled to himself. Swain noted that it was the first time he had seen the Lord like this. When asked what it was, the assistant replied that he seemed to be in love. The emperor agreed that he was often right. Not much time had passed since Hilaria had arrived with them. His Majesty inquired about the state of flood control at the Romanovs' southern estate, and closely followed the course of events. In the opinion of the ruler, it would be worth setting a meeting for the afternoon, and ordering the captain to prepare troops to send as reinforcements. And he signed the order. Swain bowed, assuring him that everything would be done. Handing over the document, the emperor emphasized that the age should not forget about internal security. After all, the crime rate in those parts had increased noticeably. The man, agreeing with His Majesty, silently bowed and walked away. Left alone, Ebenezer silently watched the cage in which the butterfly fluttered. The image of Hill immediately came to mind. With a faint smile, he whispered that his mistress was probably brave, or simply charming. The next morning, Hilaria and the Lord were having breakfast in the gazebo in the garden. He was sipping his tea slowly, staring at her with his cold gaze. It seemed to him that the princess did not like the food. However, she, looking away, assured him that everything was fine. She just had no appetite. The emperor remarked that it wouldn't work that way, and he said that the lady must have had too much wine the previous evening, although he warned that intoxication could come on unnoticed. Hilaria continued to avoid his gaze. She explained that she hadn't drunk in a long time and hadn't expected it to end like this. The princess involuntarily noticed his lips and remembered their touches that night. She remembered the words about how people had said that their eyes were incredibly compatible. Ebenezer then said that looking into her bottomless eyes, he understood that there were no others like them, and he was drowning in them like in the ocean. Those strange words seemed unbelievable to her. From his gaze to the slightest movement, everything about him became so exciting. Although they had only spent one night together, Hilaria couldn't explain her inner turmoil. The alcohol was probably still taking effect, leaving behind a confusion of feelings. The angry lady thought all this was a consequence of that damned wine. Ebenezer asked if she knew about the emergency meeting due to the flood at the Romanovs, and about the upcoming dinner with Charlotte and the treasurer. Hilaria replied that she had learned from Kate, and that's when she realized the epidemic broke out after the flood. Everyone was drinking contaminated water, which caused dehydration, and the disease spread rapidly through Infred, taking lives one by one. The princess, full of determination, wanted to join the fight, and she expressed her desire to contribute to the cause. She cautiously approached the ruler with a request to consider her proposals. He wondered what exactly it was about. Hilaria continued, noting that a flood was also a disaster, but something even worse could come after it, such as an epidemic. His Majesty was surprised, for such a thing had never happened in their empire, and he asked what reason there was to think that such a thing was possible. But the princess assured that she was simply assuming such a possibility. Since the Romanov territory was near the sea, many people used the water from there, ate seafood, and threw their waste out onto the street. Rats and seagulls carried them everywhere, and no one cleaned them up. All that unsanitary conditions could have caused an epidemic that would have swept the empire in an instant. The emperor asked whether, in addition to slum rehabilitation, attention should be paid to that issue. The princess confirmed this without question. The man was lost in thought. Looking at his pleasant face, Hilaria again felt some vague feeling. Ebenezer agreed that the suggestion was extremely reasonable, and he expressed a sincere desire to hear more. He was curious to know her vision for what to do next. Should more doctors be sent, or should the empire be supplied with additional medicines? The lady was in her own thoughts. He seemed nice to her, and he had been nicer last night. She responded quickly, unexpectedly for herself, that the priority should have been to provide the population with clean water. After all, despite the damage from the rains, it is necessary to provide everyone with drinking water. His Majesty clarified that for now, the doctors should only be warned so that they have time to prepare. Hilaria completely agreed with him. In the event of a large-scale epidemic, the Empire would need experienced specialists who were able to provide proper care for the sick. The Emperor asked if she would take care of him if he fell ill. The angry princess wondered about the origin of such a question. Looking down at herself, she admitted that she had no medical knowledge. After all, there were enough people in the palace who knew more. Ebenezer, with a faint smile, noted that her sincere concern was more valuable than any advice. After all, they were in the same bed, even sharing a blanket. Hilaria was confused when she heard about the night together. Volodar said that the previous evening she had cuddled up to him, trying to stay warm. The lady objected with all her desperation, insisting that His Highness was exaggerating. She was never cold and could sleep peacefully without a blanket. But the man only smiled softly in response, not arguing. He looked devilishly cute when he talked about it, and the princess mentally noted that the Emperor could have blurted out something else. Suddenly, Svein ran up and called His Majesty. Ebenezer stood up and apologized, explaining that he had to go to a meeting. He hoped she would have something to do, and looking at her, he was sure that she would do well. Hilaria smiled and replied that it could not be otherwise. The Emperor left and the princess finished her tea. As he passed, he gently ran his hand through her hair. She looked back, surprised by the unexpected gesture. The lady didn't understand what was happening. Everything was getting more confusing. Maybe she should avoid meeting him, or maybe she was just making it up. Suddenly, her butterflies began to flock to her, bringing her news. They said that Hilaria and the Emperor were rumored to be sleeping in the same bedroom. All the maids talked about it, thinking that the princess would become empress and then probably give birth to an heir. The butterflies also brought news from Begonia's palace, where Olivia called her the Devil Princess, expressing surprise as to why the lady and not her. From the Canary Palace, Charlotte thought the princess must be special, and Olivia didn't stand a chance. And Jen was very upset about the incident. Hearing everything, Hilaria was shocked and confused. She wondered what she had been thinking, and why she had decided that she was the only one he would drag into bed with. She also received news of the invitation, which Calistera had given to Maria to present to the widowed empress. But the head maid did not hide her displeasure. She said she expected the princess to appear in person, and not send servants. Hilaria thoughtfully stared into the swirl of her butterfly helpers, the emptiness, wondering if that endless circle of insults and reproaches would ever end. On a clear day, Cartal stepped onto Guinevere's land, his sword tightly clutched in his hand. His thoughts were filled with only the images of Beatrice and Hilaria, and the butterfly that accompanied him all the way seemed to whisper to him that he had to protect everyone who was dear to him. Approaching the high gate, he stopped in front of the guard. The guard glanced at him intently and, frowning slightly, asked the purpose of his visit. The young man was momentarily confused, but quickly regained his composure and replied that he had come to see the daughter of the Marquis of Genesis, Beatrice. The Dowager Empress's chief maid was deeply disappointed in the princess. Holding the invitation in her hands, she exclaimed angrily that, regardless of status, Hilaria shouldn't have stooped to such a level. After all, she only dared to send her maid to them. Celeste stood there in silence while the maid continued to press her. When asked how she could serve such a mistress, the girl did not know what to say. Usually the invitations were delivered by maids, but to show all her courtesy to the Empress, the princess sent Celeste. Therefore, the girl did not dare to make excuses. The maid Maria continued to express negative comments about her mistress, noting that if the girl lacked intelligence, she could at least have suggested it to Celeste. Although, in her opinion, the girl and the lady were similar. Suddenly, the maid heard Hilaria's voice. She said that she knew about this, which is why she came personally. She was standing behind Maria. Celeste was in such a hurry to address the princess that she tripped and fell to the ground. The princess calmly held out her hand, helping her to her feet, and she spoke gently so that she wouldn't panic. The maid trembled with excitement and timidly asked how her mistress ended up in that place. The lady only smiled in response, and with a barely perceptible mystery she said that she had found one way. Maria stood aside, silent and reserved, when Hilaria finally looked at her. A warm smile lit up her face. The princess sincerely expressed her joy at the meeting. In a calm, confident voice, she announced that she was the new owner of the Steel Rose. "And I heard a lot about the assistant, including her conversation with the personal maid." Maria visibly lost her composure, her posture slightly slouched. She quietly replied that she had served in Vladislav's castle for a long time, and only allowed herself to point out to Celeste her mistake. Hilaria fixed her gaze on her, a barely perceptible firmness in her voice. She remarked that mistakes really should be corrected. The princess noticed the mistake, and asked if Mary herself had never made a mistake. If not, then by what miracle did she take upon herself the right to teach others? The maid, slightly confused, stared at the lady, not quite understanding what she was leading to. Hilaria laughed softly, and she noted that it shouldn't be misunderstood. It's just that before pointing out the shortcomings of others, you should learn to look carefully at yourself. Angrily, Maria asked in a tight voice whether the princess was hinting that she was wrong. But in response, the lady only smiled slightly, emphasizing that it was not a matter of right or wrong. She was more interested in something else. Who in fact was in charge of the maids in the castle? After all, no matter how long the assistant served, no one ever appointed her head. And that made me think. Maria stood silently, her head bowed, her hands trembling slightly. The princess continued in a soft but unquestioning tone. Perhaps the Dowager Empress would listen to her. However, she found it hard to imagine that such rudeness would go unpunished in Guinevere. In the princess's own palace, such behavior would have been unacceptable. She came closer and, looking the maid straight in the eye, asked, "So that Mary would be polite to the one who had every chance of becoming her empress." Then, with a lightness that bordered on defiance, she touched a lock of her hair, noting that this was obviously how her mistress had taught her to behave. Meanwhile, Celeste silently watched everything, not daring to interfere. Hilaria, with the same reserved smile, added, "If the maid really wanted to learn etiquette, she would be happy to help." And Maria stood, hunched over and silent. It was as if she wanted to dissolve into thin air, to disappear from that humiliating scene. Then the princess remembered her recent words. She said that if the lady had no mind of her own, at least Celeste should have suggested it. Holding a piercing gaze on the maid, she needed no confirmation. The words were spoken exactly as they were. The woman bowed deeply. Her voice trembled as she, barely audible, apologized, admitting that she had acted recklessly and said the wrong thing. The princess calmly but confidently addressed Maria, noting that in the history of the castle there was no custom according to which invitations were delivered in person. She didn't ask, she just stated, hinting that the maid should have known. The woman, holding the sheet of paper with trembling hands, continued to apologize. Hilaria, without changing her expression, leaned closer and whispered that her words would probably not please either her mistress or the empress. She emphasized that she had hoped to receive the invitation. Holding her hands, she said that she would look forward to seeing the empress at the tea party. After those words, Hilaria's gaze, powerful and deep, pierced Maria like an arrow, making her blush even more. Without any further movement or explanation, the princess simply turned to Celeste and said it was time to go. She set off with a light but sure step, without looking back. The maid remained behind like a statue, bound by the breath of shame. She stood motionless, bewildered, as if the ground beneath her feet had lost its firmness. The garden paths rustled softly underfoot as Hilaria and Celeste walked back to the castle, the silence between them filled with the echoes of what had just happened. And it was then that the princess spoke up, addressing her faithful companion. With a touch of warmth mixed with authority, she expressed her conviction that the girl is the most worthy of all to become the head maid of the Steel Rose. She looked at the lady in confusion, not hiding her surprise. Her first thought was that perhaps the lady intended to take the throne, but she only sighed softly. She repeatedly repeated that imperial power did not appeal to her, and the events of recent days did not change the princess's intentions. Instead of explaining, Hilaria sincerely thanked the girl. However, the assistant, even more confused, began to argue, believing that gratitude should have sounded from her lips. Everything she achieved is the merit of the lady, who trusted her in crucial moments. The lady silently recalled that moment, when, hiding behind a column, she had become an involuntary listener to their conversation. A firm conviction had matured in her heart, that never again would Celeste bow her head to such worthlessness. She firmly stated that it was not worth paying attention to people like Maria, ordinary insects whose presence only darkened the air. After all, the girl was special to her, almost like a family member. Celeste smiled shyly and bowed deeply, thanking her mistress. Those words warmed her heart. Hilaria then saw the image of an assistant, what she was to become, the chief servant of the Steel Rose, the protector of Malin, and later the head of the entire Vladislav castle. The princess will not allow fate to take another turn. Before leaving the empire, she must return it to its rightful place. The trees rustled around her, and in that peace she fell back into thought. Celeste walked beside her, so kind, a little confused, sobbing quietly but smiling. In the castle of the widowed empress, her faithful assistant entered the chambers. Without turning around, Rovelia said that she had heard a recent commotion outside. Her voice was cold, calm. She praised Maria, adding that she had acted wisely. There was a familiar bitterness in her words. The empress knew well how to calm those whose arrogance flared up too easily. And for such people she always had a remedy. Rovelia voiced her plan. It was necessary to bribe the maids of the Steel Rose Palace. She spoke slowly, contemplating her aquarium with goldfish. Although Hilaria held a high position, she came from a simple principality. Therefore, she had neither sufficient funds nor influential means of pressure. Her words were cold as glass, yet filled with bitter confession. Maria, slightly confused, silently nodded that she understood. The empress took the invitation, held her gaze for a moment. Whispering the princess's name, she then, with ruthless solemnity, tore the paper and threw it away. Her stern gaze left no doubt. She hoped the princess would learn a bitter but necessary lesson from this. The sun was gently warming the garden as Hilaria strolled leisurely through the greenery. Her thoughts were still somewhere in the past. Suddenly, an excited voice was heard. Kate, breathless, hurried towards her, her face alight with alarm and reproach that the lady had disappeared without warning. The lady sighed and laughed. She decided to walk with Celeste. The assistant flared up but restrainedly and advised them to inform at least someone in the future, and handed her a small bag full of magic stones. Hilaria nodded gratefully, carefully accepting the gift. A butterfly that suddenly appeared next to her brought news about the widowed empress's attempt to bribe the maids of the Steel Rose. She picked up one of the magic stones and laughed softly, with an irony that bordered on contempt. It seemed almost funny to her. What seemed like a threat to others was just further proof of her superiority to the princess. Hilaria raised one of the stones to her face, and with cold confidence she noted to herself, those who stood on the other side did not even realize how futile their attempts were. Meanwhile, at the meeting, Ebenezer silently reviewed the budget reports regarding flood recovery. Hilaria's words about the danger of the epidemic came back to his mind. Given the likely contamination of the water, he decided that the allocated funds were not enough, and he ordered an increase in funding. In addition, it was ordered to immediately begin preparations for a possible crisis together with the Minister of Social Security. The reaction was immediate. There were whispers of surprise in the hall. The Minister of Social Security reminded them that there had never been any epidemics in their lands, but the Emperor, calmly and firmly, explained that despite the lack of precedents, the flood could have caused water damage and, consequently, the risk of disease outbreaks. His words were undeniable. The executives' gazes crossed in silent recognition. Even the finance manager was a bit skeptical. He also acknowledged the correctness of the instruction. The ruler stopped the discussion with a single gesture, placing his hand on the table. His decision was final. Ebenezer added slowly what he had heard, how the Minister of Social Security intended to speak to all the concubines. The manager nodded in confirmation. The Emperor coldly ordered them to listen carefully. After all, he intended to entrust the restoration of the Romanov settlement to Princess Hilaria. The director was furious that she was still so little acquainted with the affairs of the empire. The Emperor's gaze turned icy. He recalled that the princess had been involved in internal affairs in Guinevere, and had proven herself to be a worthy and far-sighted ruler. There was irritation in his voice when he asked if the ministers were seriously hinting at a lack of confidence. Tension hung in the air, but one of the people present quickly tried to smooth things over. He said it wasn't a matter of trust, it was just that everyone felt a bit awkward. Then the sheriff spoke, sincerely and respectfully. He said that he had heard a lot about the princess and her activities in the palace, and he had no doubt that she would cope. His words eased the tension. The ministers laughed and agreed. This time, His Majesty was indeed ready to support Hilaria. The butterfly who was with the emperor approached cautiously and delivered the news. The princess was bored and impatiently waiting to leave the palace. And first of all, go horseback riding. The assistant warned her to be careful with her words. The lady smiled and noticed that there was not a single listening soul around. Ebenezer smiled thoughtfully as he listened. An image appeared in his mind. The princess in the saddle, free and light as the wind. Her face was in the sunlight. Her eyes were joyful. That image awakened something deep, almost tender in him. And suddenly he really wanted to see her like this. The emperor asked how long it was until the empress's birthday. One of the men replied that it was about 2 weeks. Everything was supposed to go the same way as last year, the sheriff said. Ebenezer thought for a moment, and then he slowly looked up and, as if to himself, said that this time he would like to make changes, for example, organize horse races. The sheriff understood everything when the Lord, surveying the audience, announced that the competition would consist not only of knights and nobles, but also of the princess herself. There will be horse races, open to all who wish, and the winner will receive a special reward, a gift from the hands of His Majesty. However, time was short. The celebration was less than a month away, and preparations for such events required meticulousness. The sheriff was mentally planning, and the finance minister was reviewing the budget. Their anxious gazes crossed over the papers. As he examined the documents, Ebenezer said that everyone was busy enough and it was time to stop. He fell silent, contemplating the space before him thoughtfully. He wondered how Hilaria would take the news of the upcoming horse races. But suddenly her short but mysterious word, "I will go," flashed through his memory. And with this thought he was left alone, deciding that next time he would personally grant permission to leave his bed. With the ring on her hand, which the princess had made, Bibi found a place. In front of her was the diplomatic embassy of Freuten. She was very surprised, deciding at first that she had the wrong address, but the ring confirmed that Miss was where she should be. Freuten was indeed involved in the arms trade. The guard asked if the lady was ready to return. She agreed, smiling, and said that she had been recommended a good pastry shop there, and she must have gotten the address wrong. The guy said that as soon as the news came from the palace, she had a guest. Beatrice was overcome with astonishment. Meanwhile, a woman was watching them from the embassy window, running her fingers along the mask on the windowsill. Miss Genesis was eager to find out who had come to see her. She flew to her room, unable to feel the ground beneath her feet. Bursting into the bright living room, she noticed the young man. Struck by his appearance, she asked where Kartal had come from. On that clear, sunny day, the butler noticed with slight alarm that his mistress had lingered longer than usual on her walk. When she turned to him, she was slightly surprised by his remark, but she agreed with a smile and decided to end her promenade. Christina, wife of the Marquis of Genesis, a woman whose fate never ceased to evoke mixed feelings of wonder and longing. Her married name was Christina, second princess of the Principality of Guinevere. From a young age, the girl showed an unbridled curiosity about the world outside the palace. Finally, she dared to do what seemed impossible. The second princess secretly left her native principality. It was then that fate brought her together with Marquis Genesis and they got married. But Christina's greatest sacrifice was motherhood. The pregnancy, which should have been a blessing, turned into poison for her fragile body. However, she made the choice to sacrifice herself for the sake of her child. And perhaps fate would have been inexorable if not for Helena, the older sister. She sacrificed part of her strength, saving both Christina and the child. Thus was born Beatrice, a child of love, sacrifice, and strength, who knew not the price that was paid for her first breath. During tea, the Miss leisurely raised the cup to her lips, and without looking away, she asked what brought the young man. He calmly replied that he was Guinevere's knight, and had come by order to protect the princess. But as soon as those words were uttered, Beatrice quickly rose to her feet. She abruptly grabbed him by the cloak and menacingly ordered him to never mention Guinevere again within those walls. Surprised but attentive, the young man instantly grasped the meaning of the prohibition. Miss returned to her seat, almost calm. Across from her sat a boy who was stunned not so much by her action, but by the depth of the emotions behind it. In Hilaria's vision of the future, Kartal is the younger brother of the late Empress Benis. He betrayed Guinevere in revenge, passing military secrets to the enemies, which led to his downfall. That is why he was forbidden to enter the principality. But then he reached Infrid on his own. Beatrice could only assume that the princess had guessed about his presence. The young man sat silently, unconsciously scratching the back of his head. The magical butterfly attached to it was barely perceptibly moving its wings. Meanwhile, Lady Christina, as she approached the estate, felt a strange, oppressive foreboding. She quickly burst into the drawing room, and when she felt a familiar figure, her heart sank. She was convinced it was Helena. Bibi tried to deny it, saying it wasn't her aunt, but the woman recognized her native energy and had no doubts. Sitting down next to her, Christina calmed down and addressed the guy in a friendly manner. She introduced herself, extending her hand to him. Kartal hesitated a little, not knowing how to behave. However, he touched her palm anyway. At the moment of contact, a bright blue light flashed between them, and from it, a female figure with butterfly wings formed. Seeing her, Christina confirmed her feeling. It was Helena. The being that appeared called herself Ilya, a spirit sent by the one they had lost. She conveyed her greetings and assured her that Helena was all right. The lady, moved, thanked her. It was thanks to Helena that she was still alive. The prejudiced Beatrice turned to the creature, trying to understand whether she should trust him. But she assured him that the boy followed her every order. After all, his mission is to protect Hilaria. Returning to Kartal, the miss firmly announced, to enter the palace, he will have to get rid of the past. He had to create a new identity for himself, a different name, one that was not connected to the history they were trying to erase. The spirit confirmed her words. His true origin, the heir of Helena's lineage, must remain a secret. Its exposure threatened war. And then the creature announced that from then on the name Kartal was to disappear. And his new name was Ili, and she insisted on creating a new identity for the young man. For Beatrice, it all came as a surprise, like a bolt from the blue. But she understood the necessity of the step and silently accepted it. Meanwhile, a small blue butterfly circled around Christina, making her look up in surprise. The spirit explained that it was a blessing from Helena herself, a wish for health and happiness. Deeply moved, the woman with tears in her eyes said her sister's name and asked to convey her gratitude in words of longing. Holding the butterfly in her palms, she suddenly saw the image of Helena before her, who tenderly touched her head, telling her not to cry, "You fool." Christina laughed through her tears. It was really her sister, whose voice she had kept in her memory for so many years. Beatrice watched silently, fascinated and slightly detached. And in her mind, the thought of what Kartal would become in his new life was maturing. In the blooming garden of the steel rose, in the shade of a light gazebo, Hilaria sat. Her gaze was turned into the distance, and a slight sadness enveloped her heart. Thoughts drifted into the past, filled with nostalgia, and at that very moment Charlotte appeared, bowing slightly. She noted that the princess had arrived first. Hilaria happily replied that she had been waiting, and hoped that Charlotte would take care of the gathering. Charlotte sat down carefully, noting that the heat wasn't the worst of it. The princess asked if she had had time to eat breakfast, honestly admitting that it was hard to even eat in such weather. The lady agreed and noted that the heat was getting worse every day. So she decided to change her wardrobe and bought a new dress made of light, breathable fabrics, which were in fashion at the time. The concubine asked if the princess was also planning to update her outfits, but Hilaria replied with a smile that she had plenty of dresses brought from home. Yet at that moment, clothes didn't seem important to her. There were deeper reasons behind that, which she preferred to keep quiet about. The lady remembered that she had heard about Charlotte's next dress from Guinevere, and she wondered why she didn't prefer the embroidered flowers of the Vladislav castle. The blonde lady, a little embarrassed, returned the compliment. The princess's dresses were always impeccable. It is known that tailors tried to imitate her style, rather than dictate fashion themselves. With a slight wistfulness, she admitted that she dreamed of being like Hilaria. Looking at her, the princess mentally noted. It seemed that she would have to update her wardrobe soon. Her gaze involuntarily drifted to the side. The lady noticed the ministers approaching the gazebo in the distance. Gathering her thoughts, she rose from the table, and she calmly said that it was time to get down to business. She walked slowly but confidently towards them. She greeted everyone with her inherent dignity, and she gave her name. Hilaria Infred, mistress of the castle of the Steel Rose. In the bright gazebo, everyone took their places at a generously laid table. In front of each person lay neatly folded documents. The men, engrossed in their argument, insisted on their own opinions. One of them, frankly, could not understand how to proceed. For Hilaria, the discussion had something comical about it, and she, hiding a smile, silently watched them. Suddenly, the Minister of Finance reminded us that the main task was to reduce expenses, and with some tension in his voice, he announced it. that His Majesty has expressed his intention to hold a horse race. Surprised by the unexpected news, Hilaria slightly raised her eyebrows. The sheriff exploded with indignation, pointing out the high costs, despite the fact that the state was trying to adhere to a strict austerity regime that year. The princess, listening to the conversation, paid attention only to the mention of horse racing. After all, in her vision of the future there was no such thing. She remembered how she had thought about them in her room before, and she couldn't understand where that information had come from. There were rumors that birds eavesdropped on conversations during the day and rats at night. The sheriff turned to Hilaria, wondering if she liked the horse racing, but another person in attendance pointed out that ladies generally don't like the smell of horses, so she was probably no exception. If the princess did not mind, he wanted to convey this to His Majesty, but the lady rejected the offer, simply showing curiosity. After all, as far as she knew, horse racing had been cancelled about a century and a half ago, and she wondered why the empire had suddenly decided to restore it. The Minister of Finance emphasized that the imperial palace needed renovation. Hilaria took the word with interest. The man explained that the weather had been hot lately, and to lift the spirits of the nobles, they decided to hold a horse race, in which anyone could participate. The princess clarified whether this really applied to everyone, and asked if she could participate too. The minister confirmed this, adding that the ruler would personally award the winner, and even concubines were allowed to participate. Hilaria smiled lightly, considering the news wonderful, and expressed her desire to get down to business as soon as possible. The sheriff wondered if that meant the princess intended to compete in the horse races. She flirtatiously hinted that it was quite possible. However, the husband doubted that the other concubines would dare to compete, and he hinted that perhaps she would be better off spending her time with cool drinks. The princess laughed heartily, asking if he really thought she would cause any problems by saddling the horse. The sheriff explained that this would be the first time a woman had participated in the pageant in 300 years. The last time the Red Queen had participated was when her health failed her. He apologized for his bluntness, but he spoke from the heart. With sadness in his voice, Hilaria noted that the Red Queen had won then, and she too intended to win, with the same determination. There was confidence in her voice as she asked to convey those words to His Majesty. She began to be taught horse riding from an early age, and later she repeatedly won victories in competitions held in the principality. Not everyone aspired to master the art. Those who refused never achieved triumph, so she eagerly awaited the day of new races. Turning to Charlotte, the princess asked if she wished to participate. The concubine politely declined, explaining that she did not know how to ride. Hilaria wondered if the other concubines had any riding skills, and the lady recalled that Jenna had some experience. She had once mentioned that she liked horses. The princess just nodded because in the future she saw Jenna held a sword in her hands, sitting on a horse. In the midst of the war, she left the imperial palace and became a knight. But lacking proper training, she died at the very beginning. This made Hilaria wonder about the origins of those skills, the confident gait of a horsewoman and her skill with a sword. Jenna had probably studied before, without giving it any importance. Her potential was just waiting to be awakened. With a mysterious gleam in her eyes, the princess turned to Charlotte with an unexpected proposal, to invite her to dinner. But she was confused, not understanding the reasons for such an invitation. Hilaria, smiling, added, "If possible, let her take Jenna with her." But she was even more surprised, wondering if something had happened. After all, the concubine was a good girl, albeit a little frivolous. But the princess only said cryptically that it was time for the caterpillars to leave their cocoons. Only then could they become butterflies. If they delay, they will never spread their wings. Charlotte did not fully understand the words, but she felt that something important was brewing. Hilaria remarked that it was even better for the lady. She was uncomfortable in front of Jenna, so the invitation from the blonde's lips would have sounded more natural. Charlotte sighed heavily, and meeting the princess's penetrating gaze, she fell silent for a moment. She weighed her thoughts, but eventually agreed. That satisfied Hilaria. Jenna and Roman looked quite promising together, and she was determined to win the race and take the grand prize. In her chambers, amidst the twilight glow, the princess silently watched the sun sink below the horizon, imagining that day of her triumph.